The morning air held that particular crispness that spoke of September's approach, though Harry Potter couldn't quite appreciate its promise as he sat hunched over the kitchen table at number 4 Privet Drive. His fingers traced the edges of the thick parchment envelope that had arrived by owl not 20 minutes ago, the emerald-green ink seeming to shimmer in the pale sunlight, filtering through Aunt Petunia's meticulously clean windows. Harry had read the Hogwarts letter 3 times already. Each reading brought the same mix of wonder and trepidation, the same impossible hope that perhaps, finally, he might belong somewhere. The words seemed to dance on the cream-coloured parchment. Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Terms begins on September 1st. We await your owl by no later than July 31st. July 31st. His birthday. Today. He turned the envelope over in his hands for what must have been the 10th time, admiring the weight of it, the official seal pressed into deep red wax. It felt real in a way that his life at Privet Drive never had. But as his thumb traced along the envelope's edge, it caught against something strange, a slight irregularity, barely perceptible unless you were looking for it. Harry frowned, holding the envelope up to the window. There, along the inner seam, was what looked like another fold of paper. Something that didn't quite belong to the main body of the Hogwarts acceptance letter. His heart hammered against his ribs as he carefully worked his fingernail along the edge, trying not to tear anything important. The hidden compartment opened with a whisper of parchment against parchment. Inside was another letter, this one on paper, so white it seemed to glow. The heading was embossed in silver script that caught the light like morning frost. Académie de Magie Beauxbatons. Harry's breath caught in his throat. Even with his limited knowledge of foreign languages, he understood enough to know this was from a French magical school. But why would a French school be writing to him? And why had it been hidden inside his Hogwarts letter? His eyes scanned the elegant script, struggling with the French, but managing to piece together enough to understand the meaning. The words scholarship and Potter family legacy jumped out at him like physical blows. Dear Monsieur Potter, the letter began in perfect English below the French header. We are delighted to extend to you a place at Beauxbatons Academy of Magic for the upcoming academic year. In recognition of your family's distinguished contributions to international magical cooperation, we are pleased to offer you our most prestigious scholarship. This full academic scholarship covers not only tuition and boarding, but includes access to our Advanced Magical Studies program, typically reserved for 7th-year students. Your parents, James and Lily Potter, were valued exchange students during their time with us, and their research into protective magical theory remains influential in our curriculum today. We believe you would thrive in our international educational environment and hope you will consider accepting our offer. The letter was signed by Madame Olympe Maxime, headmistress, and dated 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks before his Hogwarts letter had arrived. Harry's hands were trembling now, though whether from excitement or anger, he couldn't quite tell. This letter had been hidden, deliberately concealed inside his Hogwarts acceptance. Someone had intercepted it. Someone had made sure he wouldn't see it unless he discovered it by accident. The implications hit him like cold water. If this letter had been hidden, how many others might there be? Were there other schools, other opportunities that had been kept from him? And if so, who was responsible? The answer came to him with sickening clarity. Professor Dumbledore, the man who had left him on the Dursleys' doorstep without explanation, the man who, according to Hagrid, was the greatest wizard of the age and kept close watch over Harry's welfare, the man who somehow always seemed to know exactly what was happening in Harry's life. He read the Beauxbatons letter again, this time more carefully. The scholarship was extraordinary, far beyond anything he might have dared hope for. Advanced magical studies, research opportunities, international magical cooperation. His parents had studied there, had contributed research that was still being used. There was a legacy here, a connection to his family that went beyond the bare facts Hagrid had shared about their deaths. The sound of Uncle Vernon's heavy footsteps on the stairs made Harry quickly fold both letters and stuff them into his trouser pocket. His uncle appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face already flushed with the morning heat and his usual state of irritation at finding Harry anywhere in his sight. "I thought I heard that ruddy howl again," Uncle Vernon growled, his small eyes scanning the kitchen for evidence of magical interference in his determinedly normal household. "Just bringing the school letter," Harry said carefully. "Nothing unusual." Uncle Vernon's expression shifted to something between relief and suspicion. "Good. About time those freaks got their act together. You'll be out of here soon enough, won't you, boy?" "Yes, sir," Harry replied, though his mind was racing in entirely different directions than his uncle might have preferred. As Uncle Vernon stomped back upstairs to finish preparing for his day of shouting at people who sold drills, Harry pulled the letters back out of his pocket. The contrast between them was striking. The Hogwarts letter, while certainly impressive with its emerald ink and official seal, suddenly seemed somehow smaller next to the elegant beauty of the Beauxbatons invitation. The French school's letter spoke of legacy, of family contributions, of advanced studies and international cooperation. The Hogwarts letter, for all its wonder, simply offered him a place among the other students. But there was something else troubling him, beyond the hidden nature of the Beauxbatons offer. If Professor Dumbledore had hidden this letter, what did that say about his other choices regarding Harry's life? The great wizard had left him with the Dursleys without explanation, had never contacted him directly, had apparently intercepted correspondence from other magical institutions. The pattern suggested a level of control that made Harry's stomach turn. He needed more information. He needed to understand what his options really were, and who was making decisions about his future. Most importantly, he needed to figure out whether the man everyone spoke of with such reverence was actually working in Harry's best interests. The decision crystallized in his mind with startling clarity. When Professor McGonagall came to take him shopping for school supplies, as Hagrid had promised she would, Harry was going to ask some very specific questions, and he was going to get answers. 3 hours later, the sharp crack of apparition in the Dursleys' front garden announced Professor McGonagall's arrival precisely on schedule. Harry had been watching from his bedroom window, the 2 letters hidden in his jacket pocket, rehearsing the conversation in his mind. He'd expected to feel nervous about confronting a teacher before he'd even started school, but instead he felt oddly calm. The anger at being manipulated had settled into cold determination. Professor McGonagall knocked on the front door with her characteristic brisk efficiency. Harry heard Uncle Vernon's heavy steps and muffled protests, followed by the professor's crisp Scottish accent, cutting through whatever objection he'd attempted to raise. Within moments, she was calling up the stairs for Harry. He found her in the front hall, looking exactly as Hagrid had described her. Tall, stern-faced, with her greying hair pulled back in a tight bun, and wearing emerald-green robes that somehow managed to look both magical and practical. Her sharp eyes assessed Harry quickly, and he caught what might have been approval, mixed with concern. "Mr. Potter," she said briskly, "I trust you're ready for our shopping expedition to Diagon Alley." "Yes, ma'am," Harry replied. "Professor McGonagall, might I ask you something before we go?" Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "Certainly." Harry pulled out the Beauxbatons letter. "I found this hidden inside my Hogwarts acceptance. Can you tell me why it was concealed?" The effect was immediate and dramatic. Professor McGonagall's composed expression cracked, replaced by something that looked distinctly like shock mixed with anger. She took the letter from Harry's hands and scanned it quickly, her lips growing thinner with each line. "Where exactly did you find this, Mr. Potter? Inside my Hogwarts letter? There was a fold in the envelope that shouldn't have been there. When I investigated, I found this hidden inside." Professor McGonagall was quiet for a long moment, her stern features working through what were clearly complex emotions. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled, though Harry could hear the edge of fury underneath. "Mr. Potter, I was not aware that Beauxbatons had extended you an invitation. More importantly, I was not aware that any correspondence directed to you had been intercepted. This letter should have reached you directly, along with any others from international magical institutions. Others." Harry's heart sank, even as his suspicions were confirmed. There were other letters. Professor McGonagall seemed to realize what she had just revealed. She straightened, her expression becoming even more severe, though Harry sensed the anger was not directed at him. "I believe, Mr. Potter, that you and I need to have a rather urgent conversation with the headmaster. However, I also believe that you deserve to understand your full range of options before making any decisions about your magical education. Would you be willing to postpone our shopping trip slightly in favor of a visit to my office at Hogwarts?" Harry nodded, though his mouth had gone dry. He was about to walk into Hogwarts for the first time, but not as an excited new student. He was going there to confront the most powerful wizard in Britain about lying to him. Professor McGonagall led him to the end of Privet Drive, where she offered him her arm. "Side-along apparition," she explained briskly. "Hold tight and try not to let go." The sensation of apparition was like being squeezed through a tube that was far too small, while simultaneously having all the air pressed from his lungs. When the world solidified around him again, Harry found himself standing in what could only be described as the most magnificent entrance hall he had ever imagined. Hogwarts was everything Hagrid had promised, and more. The great hall stretched before them, its ceiling open to a sky that showed late afternoon despite the morning hour they had left. Candles floated in mid-air, casting warm light over 4 long tables where a handful of students sat eating what appeared to be lunch. The entire space hummed with magic in a way that made Harry's skin tingle. Professor McGonagall's office was reached by climbing a spiral staircase that seemed to wind upward, far longer than the external architecture should have allowed. The office itself was circular, lined with books and what appeared to be magical instruments, whose purposes Harry couldn't begin to guess. A silver cat sat on the professor's desk, and Harry was almost certain he saw it nod in his direction. "Please sit, Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her desk. "Before we discuss your situation with the headmaster, I need you to understand something important. Every student who receives a Hogwarts letter is entitled to make an informed choice about their magical education. If other institutions have extended invitations, you have every right to consider them." Harry sat, clutching the Beauxbatons letter. "Professor, how many other schools wrote to me?" Professor McGonagall was quiet for a moment, then pulled out a piece of parchment and began writing in quick, efficient strokes. After a few minutes, she set down her quill and looked directly at Harry. "I've just sent inquiries to the other major magical institutions. Based on your magical signature and family history, I would expect that you received invitations from at least Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, and possibly Ilvermorny in America. There may have been others." The room felt suddenly very warm. Harry stared at the professor, trying to process what she was telling him. Multiple schools, multiple opportunities, all hidden from him. "Why?" he asked, his voice smaller than he intended. "Why would Professor Dumbledore hide them from me?" Professor McGonagall's expression grew even more severe, though again Harry sensed her anger was not directed at him. "That, Mr. Potter, is exactly the question I intend to ask him. The headmaster should be returning from the ministry within the hour. In the meantime, would you like to see some of Hogwarts? You should understand what all of your options offer before making any decisions." Harry nodded, though his thoughts were churning. As they left her office and began walking through the castle corridors, he found himself torn between wonder at the magical school around him and anger at the manipulation that had brought him here under false pretenses. Hogwarts was undeniably magnificent. The moving staircases, the portraits that waved and called out greetings, the sense of ancient magic soaked into the very stones. But with each marvel Professor McGonagall showed him, Harry couldn't help but wonder what the other schools were like. What opportunities had been stolen from him? What choices had been made on his behalf without his knowledge or consent? By the time they returned to Professor McGonagall's office, Harry had made his decision. He was going to hear what Professor Dumbledore had to say for himself, and then he was going to choose his own path forward, regardless of what the great wizard thought was best for him. The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows when the office door opened and Professor Dumbledore stepped inside. Harry's first impression was of tremendous age, combined with an almost tangible aura of power. The wizard's long silver beard reached nearly to his waist, and his blue eyes seemed to take in everything at once. When those eyes settled on Harry, he felt the strangest sensation, as though someone was looking not just at him, but into him. "Ah, Harry," Professor Dumbledore said, his voice warm and grandfatherly. "How wonderful to meet you at last. I trust Minerva has been showing you around our school." "Professor," Harry said, standing and pulling out the Beauxbatons letter, "I need to ask you about this." Professor Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but Harry caught something that might have been resignation in those blue eyes. The wizard took the letter, examined it briefly, and then set it gently on Professor McGonagall's desk. "I wondered when you might discover that," the headmaster said quietly. "You have always been remarkably resourceful." "So you admit you hid it from me," Harry said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. "I intercepted several letters," Professor Dumbledore replied. "Not to harm you, my dear boy, but to protect you. The wizarding world beyond Britain can be dangerous for someone with your particular fame and circumstances." Harry felt his anger crystallizing into something cold and sharp. "With respect, sir, shouldn't that have been my choice to make? You are 11 years old, Harry." The headmaster's voice remained gentle, but there was steel underneath. "There are aspects of your situation that you do not yet understand. Circumstances that require careful navigation." "Then explain them to me," Harry replied. "Tell me why I shouldn't be allowed to know about schools that want to offer me scholarships. Tell me why you get to decide where I go to school." The silence stretched between them. Professor McGonagall sat perfectly still, but Harry could sense her tension. Finally, Professor Dumbledore sighed deeply. "Very well. Harry, the truth is that you are far safer at Hogwarts than you would be anywhere else in the magical world. There are those who would wish you harm, and while you remain in Britain, under my protection, I can ensure your safety. At a foreign institution, I would be unable to guarantee your welfare." Harry considered this. "And the other schools don't know about these threats. They know of them, but they cannot offer the specific protections that Hogwarts can provide." Professor Dumbledore's blue eyes were intent on Harry's face. "My boy, I know this seems restrictive, but I have only your best interests at heart." Harry looked down at the Beauxbaton letter again, then back up at the headmaster. "Professor Dumbledore, with respect, you left me with relatives who locked me in a cupboard for 10 years. You never checked on my welfare, never ensured I was safe or happy or even fed properly. Now you're telling me that you know what's best for my education and my future." The words hung in the air like a physical thing. Professor McGonagall had gone very still, and Harry could see something that looked like guilt flicker across Professor Dumbledore's ancient features. "Harry," the professor began, but Harry was not finished. "I appreciate that there may be dangers I don't understand, but I also think I deserve the right to make informed choices about my own life. If you're truly concerned about my safety, then tell me about these threats. Explain the protections Hogwarts offers. But don't make my decisions for me, and then tell me it's for my own good." Professor Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its grandfatherly warmth and taken on a more serious tone. "You are quite right, Harry. I have made decisions for you without your input, and I apologize for that. The truth is complex, but you deserve to hear it." The headmaster settled into his chair and regarded Harry with those penetrating blue eyes. "When Harry was a baby, his parents were murdered by the darkest wizard of our time. Lord Voldemort tried to kill Harry as well, but was somehow unable to do so. The protection that saved Harry's life was created by his mother's sacrifice, and is maintained by living with his mother's blood relatives." Harry frowned. "The Dursleys. Yes. As long as you can call your aunt's house home, you are protected by magic older and stronger than most wizards can imagine. That protection extends to some degree wherever you go, but it is strongest when you are in Britain, and particularly strong at Hogwarts. And at Beauxbatons, Harry asked, it would be diminished. Not absent, but significantly weaker." Professor Dumbledore leaned forward. "Harry, Lord Voldemort is not truly gone. Someday he will return. When that happens, you will need every protection available to you." Harry considered this new information carefully. It was terrifying, certainly, but it also made sense of many things that had confused him about his fame and circumstances. "Professor," he said finally, "I understand that there are dangers, but this letter from Beauxbatons mentions that my parents studied there. They contributed research that's still being used in their curriculum. Wouldn't learning about different approaches to magic make me better prepared to face these dangers, not worse?" Professor McGonagall leaned forward. "The boy has a point, Albus. International magical education could provide him with knowledge and techniques that might be invaluable." Professor Dumbledore was quiet again, his fingers steepled in front of his face. Finally, he sighed deeply. "You are both correct, of course. Harry, if you truly wish to consider your other options, I will not stand in your way. However, I do ask that you understand the risks you would be taking." Harry felt a rush of relief, mixed with apprehension. "Thank you, Professor. I'd like to learn more about what Beauxbatons offers before making any final decisions." "Of course." Professor Dumbledore stood and moved toward the office door. "Minerva, perhaps you could arrange for Harry to speak with someone who has experience with international magical education. I believe we owe him the opportunity to make a fully informed choice." As the headmaster left the office, Harry sank back in his chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. The conversation had gone better than he had feared, but had also opened up possibilities that felt almost overwhelming. Professor McGonagall was watching him carefully. "How are you feeling, Mr. Potter?" "Confused," Harry admitted, "but also hopeful, I think. For the first time, I feel like I might actually have choices about my future." The professor nodded approvingly. "That, Mr. Potter, is exactly as it should be. Now shall we continue with our shopping trip to Diagon Alley? You'll need supplies regardless of which school you ultimately choose." As they prepared to leave Hogwarts, Harry carefully folded the Beauxbatons letter and placed it back in his pocket. The next few weeks were going to be crucial in determining the entire course of his magical education, and perhaps his life. For the first time since receiving his Hogwarts letter, Harry felt like he was truly in control of his own destiny. Whatever he decided, it would be his choice to make. The owl that arrived at Harry's dormitory window on a crisp September morning carried more than just the usual Academy correspondence. Along with letters from Professor McGonagall and his friends Ron and Hermione, there was an official communication from Hogwarts that made Harry's heart race with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The letter bore the familiar emerald seal of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, but the formal tone was unmistakably that of Professor Dumbledore himself. The message was brief but loaded with implications that Harry found both troubling and oddly satisfying. "Dear Harry," it read in the headmaster's distinctive script, "I understand that you have been selected as the Beauxbatons champion for the upcoming Tri-Wizard tournament. While I confess surprise at this development, I want you to know that you will be welcomed at Hogwarts with the respect due to any visiting champion. I look forward to our reunion and to learning about your experiences in international magical education. The letter was signed with Professor Dumbledore's characteristic flourish, but Harry detected undertones that suggested the headmaster's feelings about his return were considerably more complex than the polite words indicated. There was something in the phrasing that implied both curiosity and concern, as though Professor Dumbledore was genuinely uncertain about what Harry had become during his time at Beauxbatons. More intriguingly, there were separate letters from Ron and Hermione that painted a picture of Hogwarts life that seemed increasingly limited compared to what Harry had experienced in France. Ron's letter described their defense against the dark arts classes as basic and repetitive, while Hermione expressed frustration with the lack of advanced research opportunities and theoretical depth in their coursework. Hermione had written in her characteristically precise handwriting, "I've been reading about international magical education since you left, and I have to admit that Beauxbatons sounds far more academically rigorous than Hogwarts. Are you really presenting original research to international scholars? That sounds absolutely fascinating, and frankly rather beyond anything we're doing here." Ron's letter was more personal, but equally revealing. "Honestly, mate," he wrote, "sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if we'd all gone to Beauxbatons together. The stories you've told us about your classes and research make our lessons here sound pretty boring by comparison. I hope you'll tell us more about everything when you come for the tournament." The contrast between his friend's experiences at Hogwarts and his own academic journey at Beauxbatons had grown increasingly stark over the months of correspondence, where they described rote memorization and basic spell practice. He had been engaged in original magical research and advanced theoretical study. Where they worked in isolation, he collaborated with international students on projects that crossed traditional magical boundaries. But perhaps most significantly, where they remained within the comfortable limitations of British magical tradition, he had discovered possibilities for magical application and international cooperation that would have been unimaginable within the confines of Hogwarts education. The final letter in the morning's delivery was from Professor McGonagall, and its contents provided insights that helped explain some of the undercurrents Harry had detected in Professor Dumbledore's communication. "Harry," she wrote in her familiar, precise script, "I wanted to prepare you for some of the reactions you may encounter when you return to Hogwarts for the tournament. Your success at Beauxbatons has attracted considerable attention within the British magical community, and not all of it is entirely positive." She went on to explain that Harry's academic achievements and research publications had been reported in various magical publications, creating a narrative about the talented British wizard who had chosen international education over traditional magical schooling. Some viewed his success as validation of educational choice and international cooperation, while others saw it as a rejection of British magical values and traditions. "The Ministry of Magic," Professor McGonagall continued, "has shown particular interest in your academic progress and research work. I believe they are concerned about the precedent your success might set for other British magical students considering international education options. The political implications of his academic success were something Harry had not fully considered, but they added additional complexity to what he had initially viewed as a straightforward magical competition. His participation in the tournament would apparently carry significance far beyond the traditional scope of inter-school rivalry. Henri found him reading the letters in the Bellefeuille common room that afternoon, and his friend's reaction to the political dimensions was characteristically enthusiastic. "But this is magnifique." "Harry," Henry exclaimed, after Harry explained the contents of the correspondence, "you have the opportunity to demonstrate not just your own achievements, but the superiority of international magical education. The tournament will be the perfect stage for showing what Beauxbatons has helped you become." Gabrielle, who had been working on her own research project nearby, looked up with a more analytical perspective. "The political pressure could actually work in your favor, Harry. If the British magical community is watching your performance closely, your success will validate not just your own choices, but the entire philosophy of international magical cooperation. Victor, who had been accepted for advanced study at several European magical universities based on his Beauxbatons achievements, added his own insights about the broader implications. Harry, your tournament participation represents more Zen personal competition. You are carrying Z flag for educational freedom and international magical cooperation. Z responsibility is significant, but Z opportunity to influence future educational policy is extraordinary. Over the following weeks, as Harry continued his tournament preparation while maintaining his research commitments and advanced coursework, he found himself increasingly aware of the symbolic weight his participation would carry. Faculty members who had previously treated him as simply another talented student now seemed to view him as an ambassador for Academy values and international magical education. Professor Lemaire made this explicit during one of their research supervision meetings. "Harry," she said, as they reviewed his latest experimental results, "you should understand that your tournament participation will be closely observed by magical educators throughout Europe. Your performance will influence policy discussions about international student exchange and educational cooperation for years to come." The pressure was both motivating and somewhat overwhelming, but Harry found that his Beauxbatons education had prepared him well for carrying such responsibility. The Academy's emphasis on international cooperation and collaborative achievement had taught him to think beyond personal success toward broader magical community benefit. As October approached and the tournament date drew near, Harry's final preparations took on increased intensity. His practical magical abilities had advanced far beyond anything he might have achieved through traditional magical education, but more importantly, his approach to magical problem-solving had been fundamentally transformed by his exposure to international magical techniques and theoretical frameworks. The evening before his departure for Hogwarts, Harry sat in his dormitory room completing final preparations, while reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed since that morning when he discovered the hidden Beauxbatons invitation. The stack of research notes and academic achievements on his desk represented not just personal accomplishment, but validation of every choice he had made about his magical education. Henri appeared at his door as he finished packing the formal robes that would identify him as the Beauxbatons champion. "Mon ami," Henri said with characteristic warmth, "I've something for you to take to the tournament." He handed Harry a small package wrapped in Academy colors. Inside was a silver pendant bearing the Beauxbatons coat of arms, but inscribed on the reverse were the words "International Magical Cooperation" in multiple languages. "From all of your friends at Z Academy," Henri explained. "We wanted you to carry a reminder that you represent not just Beauxbatons, but the values we all share about magical education and international cooperation." The gesture was deeply moving, representing the community of scholars and friends that had become Harry's true magical family over the past year. These relationships, built on shared intellectual interests and mutual respect rather than fame or circumstance, had provided him with exactly the kind of supportive environment he had hoped to find through international magical education. Gabrielle arrived as Henri was leaving, bringing her own farewell gift in the form of a collection of research papers they had collaborated on during their advanced studies. "Harry," she said, with her characteristic blend of warmth and analytical precision, "this represents the work we've done together on protective magic theory. I thought you might want to have them with you as a reminder of what collaborative magical research can achieve." The papers represented some of Harry's most innovative theoretical work, building on his parents' foundation while exploring applications that extended far beyond traditional protective magic. Having them with him during the tournament would serve both as practical reference material and as a reminder of the academic achievements that had brought him to this point. Victor's farewell was characteristically direct and competitive. "Harry," he said with a firm handshake and genuine respect, "you have proven that magical excellence knows no national boundaries. Demonstrate that at the tournament, and you will honor not just Beauxbatons, but the entire international magical community." The journey to Hogwarts the following morning was unlike anything Harry had experienced during his travels between magical institutions. The Beauxbatons delegation travelled in the magnificent flying coach drawn by Abraxans, but the atmosphere was formal and ceremonial rather than casual, reflecting the significance of their mission as representatives of international magical education. Madame Maxime had chosen to accompany the delegation personally, bringing along several faculty members whose presence underscored the Academy's commitment to the tournament as an opportunity for educational diplomacy. Professor Lemaire travelled with them to observe Harry's performance and provide guidance if needed, while Professor Dubois came as the official Academy representative for inter-school magical cooperation discussions. As the flying coach approached Hogwarts across the Scottish Highlands, Harry got his first view of the castle since his confrontational meeting with Professor Dumbledore over a year ago. The familiar towers and battlements looked smaller somehow than he remembered, though whether that was due to perspective or his own growth during his time at Beauxbatons was difficult to determine. The landing on the Hogwarts grounds was met with considerable ceremony, with what appeared to be the entire student body assembled to witness the arrival of the visiting delegations. Harry could see Professor Dumbledore waiting with the other faculty members, his expression unreadable as he observed the magnificent coach and its occupants. As Harry disembarked, wearing his formal Beauxbatons robes and carrying himself with the confidence he had developed through academic achievement and international experience, he caught sight of Ron and Hermione in the crowd of watching students. Their expressions of amazement and pride were gratifying, but he also detected something that might have been regret, as though they were seeing possibilities for their own magical education that they had never fully considered. Professor Dumbledore stepped forward to greet the Beauxbatons delegation with formal courtesy. But when his eyes met Harry's, there was a complex mixture of emotions that included surprise, assessment, and what might have been a touch of genuine admiration. "Welcome to Hogwarts, Harry," the headmaster said with careful neutrality. "You honor us with your presence as the Beauxbatons champion. I look forward to learning about your magical development during your time in international education." "Thank you, Professor Dumbledore," Harry replied with equal formality. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to represent Beauxbatons Academy and to demonstrate what international magical cooperation can achieve." The exchange was polite, but loaded with subtext that both participants clearly understood. Harry had returned to Hogwarts not as the boy who had left in confusion and anger, but as an accomplished young wizard whose achievements validated every choice he had made about his magical education. As the delegation was escorted into the castle for the formal tournament ceremonies, Harry reflected on how dramatically his perspective had shifted since his last visit to these halls. Then, he had been seeking answers about his educational options and fighting for the right to make his own choices. Now, he was returning as proof that those choices had been not just justified, but extraordinarily successful. The tournament would test his magical abilities and competitive spirit, but more importantly, it would provide an opportunity to demonstrate what he had become through international magical education. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Harry was prepared to meet them with the skills, knowledge, and confidence he had developed at Beauxbatons Academy of Magic. The evening feast that welcomed the visiting delegations was magnificent, but Harry found himself observing the differences between Hogwarts and Beauxbatons traditions with the analytical eye of someone who had experienced both educational environments. The ceremony was impressive, but seemed somehow more insular than the international celebrations he had grown accustomed to at the Academy. As he settled into his temporary quarters in the castle that night, Harry felt ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The tournament would begin soon, and with it, his opportunity to honor Beauxbatons, while proving that the path he had chosen for his magical education had been not just different, but superior in every way that truly mattered. The announcement came during breakfast on Harry's second day at Hogwarts, delivered with the kind of understated gravity that Professor McGonagall brought to all significant academic matters. As the Beauxbatons delegation sat at their designated table in the Great Hall, she approached with a formal scroll, that bore the seal of the International Confederation of Wizards. "Mr. Potter," she said, with an expression that managed to combine professional formality with obvious personal pride, "I have been asked to inform you that you have been selected to participate in the International Magical Student Exchange Program. This is an extraordinary honor that reflects your exceptional academic achievements at Beauxbatons Academy." Harry accepted the scroll with hands that were steadier than he felt, immediately aware that every eye in the great hall was focused on their exchange. The parchment was heavy with official seals and signatures that represented magical institutions from around the world, but it was the content that made his heart race with excitement and anticipation. The invitation was comprehensive and impressive, offering Harry the opportunity to spend the next academic year visiting multiple prestigious magical schools around the world as part of an experimental program designed to foster international magical cooperation and educational excellence. The itinerary included Durmstrang Institute for Advanced Dark Arts Defense Studies, Ilvermorny School for Innovative Magical Applications, Mahutakoro Academy for Precision Magical Techniques, and several smaller institutions that specialized in unique magical disciplines. But perhaps most significantly, the program was designed around Harry's specific academic interests and research goals. Each placement would allow him to work with leading magical researchers in areas related to his parents' work, while contributing to ongoing international collaborative projects. The opportunity represented everything he had hoped to achieve through international magical education, magnified beyond anything he had previously imagined possible. Professor McGonagall remained beside their table as Harry absorbed the contents of the invitation. "The selection committee was particularly impressed by your research publications and your contributions to international magical cooperation through Beauxbatons. They believe you represent exactly the kind of scholar they hope to develop through this experimental program." Madame Maxime, who had been reading over Harry's shoulder with obvious satisfaction, spoke for the first time since Professor McGonagall's arrival. "This is indeed a remarkable honor. Harry, the International Exchange Program accepts only 2 students per year from the entire global magical community. Your selection validates not only your own achievements, but the excellence of Beauxbatons educational philosophy. The implications of this opportunity were staggering. Harry would spend the coming year studying at the most prestigious magical institutions in the world, working with researchers whose names appeared in the most advanced magical texts, contributing to projects that could reshape international magical cooperation for decades to come. But as he considered the practical aspects of accepting such an extraordinary opportunity, Harry became aware that their conversation had attracted the attention of students throughout the Great Hall. Conversations at nearby tables had died away as Hogwarts students strained to overhear the discussion, and he could see expressions ranging from amazement to envy to something that might have been resentment. Professor Dumbledore rose from the head table and approached their group with the kind of measured stride that suggested he had been expecting this development. "Harry," he said with careful neutrality, "might I have a word with you privately about this opportunity? There are certain considerations that may affect your decision." Harry glanced at Madame Maxime, who nodded approvingly, despite the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested wariness about Professor Dumbledore's intentions. "Of course, Professor. Though I should mention that any decision about the exchange program would need to be made in consultation with Beauxbatons faculty." "Naturally," Professor Dumbledore agreed smoothly. "I would not presume to interfere with your academic advisors. I simply thought you might benefit from understanding the full context surrounding this invitation." They made their way to a small chamber off the Great Hall that provided privacy, while remaining within the formal boundaries appropriate for such discussions. Professor Dumbledore settled behind a modest desk, while Harry took the seat across from him, conscious that this conversation would likely address issues far beyond the exchange program itself. "Harry," Professor Dumbledore began, "I want you to understand that I am genuinely impressed by your academic achievements at Beauxbatons. Your research work and international recognition represent exactly the kind of magical excellence that the wizarding world needs." He paused, his blue eyes studying Harry's face with characteristic intensity. "However, I feel obligated to mention certain security considerations that may affect your decision about participating in this exchange program." Harry had been expecting this line of discussion, but he found himself feeling more confident about addressing it than he might have a year ago. "Professor, are you referring to the same security concerns that led you to hide my educational options when I was 11? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that both participants clearly understood. Professor Dumbledore's expression grew more serious, but Harry detected something that might have been resignation rather than defensiveness. "I understand your skepticism, Harry, and I acknowledge that my previous decisions about your education were overly controlling. However, the threats that concern me remain real and significant. Lord Voldemort's supporters are still active, and they have shown particular interest in your movements and activities." Harry considered this information carefully, drawing on the analytical thinking that his Beauxbatons education had developed. "Professor, with respect, the international exchange program would actually provide additional security through geographical distribution and the protection of multiple magical institutions. Concentrating threats in a single location seems less safe than spreading them across multiple countries." Professor Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, clearly reassessing his approach. "You have developed considerable strategic thinking during your time at Beauxbatons. Your analysis of the security implications is quite sophisticated." "Thank you, Professor." Harry felt his confidence growing as the conversation progressed. "I've also been wondering whether the security concerns you mention might be related to my research work rather than simply my identity as the boy who lived." The headmaster's eyebrows rose slightly. "What do you mean by that?" Harry pulled out some of his research notes, materials he had brought with him as reference for potential tournament challenges. "My work on protective magic theory has been published in several international journals, and I've received correspondence from researchers around the world who are interested in collaborating on applications. If there are people who want to suppress this kind of magical innovation, they might see the exchange program as a threat." Professor Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing Harry's reasoning. "That is a perceptive observation, and one that I had not fully considered. Your parents' research was indeed considered threatening by certain elements within the magical community, both light and dark. So the question becomes whether the exchange program represents a genuine security risk or an opportunity to advance magical knowledge in ways that make the magical community safer overall." Harry watched as Professor Dumbledore wrestled with the logic of this argument, seeing the moment when the older wizard realized that his own reasoning supported Harry's position rather than undermining it. "Harry," Professor Dumbledore said finally, "I believe you have developed the kind of independent thinking and strategic analysis that such an opportunity requires. If you choose to accept the exchange program, you will do so with my support rather than my opposition." The conversation that followed was unlike any Harry had previously had with the Hogwarts headmaster, focusing on practical considerations and mutual respect rather than authority and control. Professor Dumbledore provided insights about the magical institutions included in the exchange program, shared observations about international magical politics that could affect Harry's experience, and offered guidance about maintaining connections with both Beauxbatons and Hogwarts during his travels. When they returned to the Great Hall, Harry found himself surrounded by curious friends and faculty members eager to learn about his conversation with Professor Dumbledore. The news that the Hogwarts headmaster supported his participation in the exchange program seemed to surprise everyone, though for different reasons. Hermione approached him as the formal meal concluded, her expression combining excitement with what appeared to be a touch of envy. "Harry," she said, with characteristic directness, "this exchange program sounds absolutely incredible. You're going to study at schools that most wizards never even hear about, working with researchers whose names are in our textbooks. Ron joined them with his usual good-natured enthusiasm, tempered by obvious amazement. "Mate, when you left Hogwarts, I thought you were just choosing a different school. I didn't realize you were going to become some kind of international magical scholar." Their reactions reinforced Harry's growing understanding of how dramatically his educational experience had diverged from what his friends were receiving at Hogwarts. The opportunities available through international magical education were apparently far beyond what most British wizards ever encountered or even imagined possible. Victor, who had accompanied the Durmstrang delegation to Hogwarts for the tournament, sought Harry out that afternoon with obvious excitement about the exchange program announcement. "Harry," he said, with characteristic intensity, "this program represents the future of magical education. The opportunity to study advanced magical techniques at multiple institutions will give you perspectives that no single school can provide." He lowered his voice as they walked along one of Hogwarts' covered corridors. "I've heard rumors about this program for years, but I never believed they would actually implement it. The fact that they selected you as one of the first participants suggests that the international magical community sees great potential in your research and academic development." Gabrielle, who had traveled with the Beauxbatons delegation as part of her own advanced studies program, provided additional insights about the institutions included in Harry's exchange program. "Each school has specialties that could contribute to your research. Harry, Durmstrang's approach to defensive magic is quite different from what we learn at Beauxbatons. Ilvermorny has revolutionary techniques for magical innovation. Mahutokoro's precision training could help you refine your practical applications." The evening brought the formal announcement of Harry's selection at a special ceremony attended by delegates from all participating schools. The recognition was both thrilling and somewhat overwhelming, representing validation of his academic choices while highlighting the responsibilities that came with such extraordinary opportunities. Professor Lemaire, who had accompanied the Beauxbatons delegation as Harry's research advisor, spoke with him privately after the ceremony about the implications of accepting the exchange program. "Harry," she said, with obvious pride mixed with concern, "this opportunity will advance your academic development beyond anything we could provide at any single institution. However, the responsibilities will be significant." She gestured toward the formal documentation that outlined the exchange program expectations. "You will be representing not just yourself, but the entire concept of international magical cooperation. Your performance and contributions will influence policy decisions about similar programs for decades to come." The pressure was considerable, but Harry found that his Beauxbatons education had prepared him well for carrying such responsibility. The Academy's emphasis on collaborative achievement and international perspective had taught him to think beyond personal success toward broader magical community benefit. That night, alone in his temporary quarters at Hogwarts, Harry reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken since discovering the hidden Beauxbatons invitation. The exchange program represented opportunities he could never have imagined when he was living in the cupboard under the stairs at Privet Drive, studying at institutions that existed only in legends for most British wizards. The letters he wrote that evening attempted to capture his excitement while acknowledging the challenges ahead. To his friends at Beauxbatons, he expressed gratitude for the educational foundation that had made his selection possible. To Professor McGonagall, he shared his appreciation for her support of his educational choices. To the Dursleys, he wrote with barely contained satisfaction that he would be continuing his international education for another year. But it was his letter to Madame Maxime that proved most meaningful, thanking her for the transformative education that had not only prepared him academically, but given him the confidence to pursue opportunities that most wizards could only dream of achieving. The exchange program would take him around the world, exposing him to magical techniques and research opportunities that would shape his entire future as a wizard. More importantly, it would allow him to contribute meaningfully to international magical cooperation while advancing research that could benefit the global magical community. As Harry prepared for sleep in the castle where his magical education might have taken a completely different path, he felt profound gratitude for the choices that had brought him to this moment. The exchange program represented not just personal opportunity, but validation of every decision he had made about pursuing excellence through international magical education. Tomorrow would bring the tournament challenges that had originally brought him back to Hogwarts, but now those competitions felt like a celebration of achievements rather than a test of abilities. Whatever the outcomes, Harry was confident that he had chosen the right path for his magical development and was prepared to continue pursuing excellence wherever it might lead. The future stretched ahead of him, full of possibilities that seemed to expand with each new opportunity, and that future was entirely his own creation, built through choices made with determination to become the kind of wizard who could contribute meaningfully to the advancement of magical knowledge and international cooperation. The final day of the Triwizard Tournament dawned with unseasonable warmth for late October, as though the Scottish Highlands themselves were celebrating the culmination of centuries-old magical traditions. Harry stood at the window of his temporary quarters at Hogwarts, watching the sun rise over the grounds where he had once imagined spending 7 years of his magical education. The irony was not lost on him that he was returning to complete his first year at the castle as an accomplished international scholar rather than a confused and manipulated child. The tournament challenges had proven everything that Harry's Beauxbatons education had promised. Where other champions relied on brute magical force or traditional spell combinations, Harry had applied innovative theoretical approaches and international magical techniques that impressed judges and spectators alike. His performance had validated not just his personal achievements, but the entire philosophy of international magical education that Beauxbatons represented. But today brought something far more significant than tournament victory. Today, Harry would make the final choice about his magical future, accepting opportunities that would shape not just his own development, but the future of international magical cooperation. The exchange program was only the beginning of possibilities that seemed to expand with each achievement. A soft knock at his door interrupted his morning reflections. Professor McGonagall entered with the kind of formal bearing that suggested she was representing Hogwarts in an official capacity, but her expression combined professional duty with obvious personal pride. "Mr. Potter," she said as he turned from the window, "I have been asked to discuss with you a rather extraordinary proposal that has emerged from your tournament performance and your selection for the international exchange program." Harry gestured for her to sit, curious about what additional opportunities could possibly have developed in the brief time since his exchange program selection was announced. The parchment she carried bore seals from multiple magical institutions, suggesting a collaboration of unprecedented scope. Professor McGonagall opened the document with careful attention to its obvious importance. "Mr. Potter, based on your academic achievements and demonstrated commitment to international magical cooperation, you have been offered the opportunity to establish a new scholarship program funded jointly by magical institutions throughout Europe and beyond." Harry felt his breath catch as she continued reading the proposal. The James and Lily Potter International Magical Education Foundation would provide scholarships for students seeking to pursue magical education outside their home countries, with a particular focus on supporting collaborative research and international cooperation projects. But perhaps most significantly, Professor McGonagall continued, you would serve as the Foundation's first Director of Student Development, working with magical institutions worldwide to identify promising students and develop educational opportunities that transcend traditional national boundaries. The scope of what was being offered was almost incomprehensible. Harry would not only continue his own international magical education, but would help create opportunities for other students to experience the kind of transformative learning that had shaped his own development. The Foundation would honor his parents' commitment to international cooperation while building his own legacy as an advocate for educational excellence. "Professor," he said finally, "this sounds like exactly the kind of work I hoped to pursue through my magical career. But I have to ask about the practical implications. How would this affect my own educational goals and research commitments?" Professor McGonagall smiled with the kind of satisfaction that suggested she had been hoping for exactly this response. The foundation work would complement, rather than compete with your academic pursuits. You would continue your exchange program studies while simultaneously identifying and mentoring other students who could benefit from similar opportunities. She consulted another section of the proposal document. The participating institutions believe that your unique perspective as someone who has experienced both traditional and international magical education makes you ideally suited to guide other students through similar transitions. As Harry absorbed the implications of this opportunity, he became aware of voices in the corridor outside his room. Through the partially open door, he could hear what sounded like an intense discussion between Madame Maxime and Professor Dumbledore about the foundation proposal. I believe Madame Maxime was saying in her distinctive accent, "That, Harry, has proven beyond any doubt, that his educational choices have been not just successful, but transformative. The foundation represents the natural evolution of his commitment to international magical cooperation." Professor Dumbledore's response was measured, but carried undertones of something that might have been regret. "I agree that Harry has exceeded every expectation for academic achievement and personal development. His success at Beauxbatons has been remarkable, and I acknowledge that my initial concerns about his educational choices were unfounded." There was a pause before the headmaster continued. "I confess that I have come to realize that my attempts to control Harry's educational path were motivated more by my own fears than by his genuine needs. He has demonstrated that international magical education can provide opportunities that no single institution could match." Harry felt a complex mixture of emotions as he heard Professor Dumbledore's admission. The validation was gratifying, but more importantly, it represented recognition that his choices had been not just personally beneficial, but educationally sound. The man whose authority he had challenged was now acknowledging the superiority of the path Harry had chosen. Professor McGonagall rose from her chair with obvious satisfaction. "Mr. Potter, I believe you have your answer about the foundation proposal. The support from both Hogwarts and Beauxbatons provides exactly the kind of institutional backing that such an ambitious project requires." She moved toward the door, then paused to add her own perspective. "Harry, I want you to know that watching your transformation from the confused boy who discovered the hidden Beauxbaton letter to the accomplished scholar you have become has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my educational career. You have proven that students should be trusted to make their own choices about their futures." After Professor McGonagall left, Harry spent several hours reviewing the foundation proposal and considering the implications of accepting such significant responsibility at his age. The opportunity was everything he had hoped to achieve through his magical career, but it also represented challenges that would test every skill he had developed through his international education. The knock that interrupted his afternoon planning was unexpected. Professor Dumbledore entered with the kind of careful humility that suggested he was approaching this conversation as a petitioner rather than an authority figure. "Harry," he said, as he settled into the chair Professor McGonagall had vacated, "I wanted to speak with you privately about the foundation proposal and about our relationship more generally." Professor Dumbledore looked older, somehow, than Harry remembered, though whether that was due to actual aging or simply Harry's changed perspective was difficult to determine. The blue eyes that had once seemed so penetrating now appeared more thoughtful than commanding. "I owe you an apology, Harry." The headmaster's voice carried a weight of genuine regret. "My attempts to control your educational path were wrong, motivated by fears that blinded me to your actual needs and capabilities. You have proven that international magical education could provide opportunities that I never fully appreciated." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "More importantly, You have demonstrated that young people should be trusted to make informed decisions about their own futures when provided with accurate information and appropriate support." Harry considered the apology carefully, feeling the anger and resentment that had once dominated his feelings about Professor Dumbledore giving way to something closer to understanding. "Professor, I appreciate your acknowledgement of what happened. I think we both learned important lessons about the difference between protection and control." Professor Dumbledore nodded slowly. "Indeed we did. Harry, I want you to know that you have my complete support for the Foundation project and for whatever educational path you choose to pursue. Your parents would be extraordinarily proud of what you have accomplished." The conversation that followed was unlike any Harry had previously had with the Hogwarts headmaster, focusing on mutual respect and shared commitment to magical education rather than authority and obligation. Professor Dumbledore provided insights about the political challenges the Foundation might face, offered connections with international magical organizations that could provide support, and expressed genuine enthusiasm for the collaborative educational opportunities the project could create. When Professor Dumbledore prepared to leave, he offered a final observation that seemed to encapsulate their evolved relationship. "Harry, you have become exactly the kind of wizard the magical world needs, someone who pursues excellence through collaboration rather than dominance, who values knowledge over power, and who works to create opportunities for others rather than simply advancing yourself." That evening, the final tournament ceremony provided an opportunity for Harry to address the gathered representatives of magical institutions from around the world. His speech, delivered in multiple languages, thanks to translation charms provided by Beauxbatons, focused on the importance of international magical cooperation and the transformative power of educational choice. The James and Lily Potter International Magical Education Foundation, he announced to the assembled delegates, will work to ensure that talented students everywhere have access to the educational opportunities that can help them reach their full potential, regardless of their national origin or traditional institutional boundaries. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with representatives from magical schools throughout Europe and beyond expressing enthusiasm for participating in the Foundation's programs. The scope of international support suggested that Harry's personal educational journey had resonated with educators who shared his commitment to excellence through cooperation. Henri, Gabrielle, and Victor joined him after the ceremony, their excitement about the Foundation project infectious and gratifying. The prospect of working with his closest friends to create educational opportunities for other students felt like the perfect culmination of everything they had learned together at Beauxbatons. Victor, who had been accepted for advanced study at several magical universities based on his international educational experience, provided characteristically direct encouragement. "Harry, this foundation represents the future of magical education. The opportunity to help other students experience the kind of transformative learning we have shared is exactly what the magical community needs." Gabrielle, whose own research work had been accepted for publication in international magical journals, added her analytical perspective. "The Foundation will allow us to systematically address the educational limitations that exist in traditional magical schooling. We can create pathways for students to pursue excellence, regardless of where they begin their magical education." Henri, with his characteristic enthusiasm for ambitious projects, was already envisioning the practical applications. "Imagine the research collaborations we could facilitate, mon ami. Students from different magical traditions working together on projects that no single institution could support independently." The evening concluded with a private dinner hosted by Madame Maxime for the Beauxbatons delegation and selected guests, including Professor McGonagall and, somewhat surprisingly, Professor Dumbledore. The conversation ranged across topics that included the future of magical education, the importance of international cooperation, and the potential impact of the Foundation project on magical society more broadly. Professor Dumbledore, who had been notably quiet during most of the dinner, finally spoke as dessert was being served. "I want to express my admiration for what Harry has accomplished through his educational choices. His success at Beauxbatons has challenged many of my assumptions about magical education and has convinced me that we must do better at supporting student agency in educational decision-making." He turned toward Harry with an expression of genuine respect. The Foundation project represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking that the magical education community needs. Hogwarts will be honored to participate in any way that proves helpful. Madame Maxime raised her glass in a toast that seemed to encapsulate the significance of the moment. To Harry Potter, who, as proven that educational excellence knows no national boundaries, and to the James and Lily Potter International Magical Education Foundation, which will help ensure that future students have access to the opportunities that can transform their lives and advance the magical community. As the formal evening concluded and guests began making their departures, Harry found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this moment. The hidden Beauxbatons letter that he had discovered by accident had led not just to personal educational success, but to opportunities that could benefit magical students for generations to come. Later that night, alone in his quarters one final time before returning to France, Harry completed the formal acceptance of both the exchange program and the Foundation directorship. The documents represented commitments that would shape the next several years of his life, but more importantly, they offered the chance to honor his parents' legacy while building his own contribution to magical education and international cooperation. The letters he wrote that evening attempted to capture the significance of the opportunities while expressing gratitude to everyone who had supported his educational journey. To his friends at Beauxbatons, he shared his excitement about continuing their collaborative work on a global scale. To Professor McGonagall, he expressed appreciation for her unwavering support of his right to choose his own educational path. But it was his letter to the Dursleys that provided the most satisfaction, informing them with carefully controlled politeness that he would not be returning to Privet Drive at all, having established his own independent magical career focused on international education and research. Their response, when it eventually came, was predictably dismissive but also clearly relieved. As Harry prepared for sleep on his final night at Hogwarts, he reflected on the transformation that had occurred since his last visit to the castle. He had returned not as the confused and angry boy who had rejected his Hogwarts letter, but as an accomplished young wizard whose achievements had exceeded everyone's expectations, including his own. The exchange program would take him around the world, exposing him to magical techniques and research opportunities that would continue his academic development while providing material for the Foundation's educational initiatives. The directorship would allow him to help other students discover the transformative power of international magical education. More importantly, he had proven that young people could be trusted to make informed decisions about their own futures when provided with accurate information and appropriate support. The Foundation would institutionalize this principle, creating systematic opportunities for educational choice and international cooperation. Tomorrow would bring his return to Beauxbatons and the beginning of preparations for the exchange program. But tonight, Harry was content to be exactly where he had chosen to be, pursuing the kind of meaningful magical career that honored his parents while creating opportunities for future generations of magical students. The future stretched ahead of him, full of possibilities that seemed to expand with each achievement and each choice to pursue excellence through international cooperation. And that future was entirely his own creation, built through decisions made with determination to become the kind of wizard who could contribute meaningfully to the advancement of magical knowledge and educational opportunity. As Harry drifted off to sleep for the last time in the castle where his magical education might have taken a completely different path, he felt profound gratitude for the hidden letter that had changed everything. Tomorrow would mark not the end of his educational journey, but the beginning of a lifetime devoted to ensuring that other students had access to the same kinds of transformative opportunities that had shaped his own development into the wizard he had chosen to become. The bell above the door of Flourish and Blots chimed with a musical note that seemed to harmonize with itself as Harry and Professor McGonagall stepped inside. The bookshop was everything Harry had imagined a magical library might be, with towering shelves that stretched far higher than the building's external dimensions should have allowed, books that occasionally fluttered their pages like preening birds, and the rich scent of parchment and binding glue that spoke of centuries of accumulated knowledge. Professor McGonagall had suggested they begin their research here after their shopping expedition through Diagon Alley had yielded Harry's school supplies, and, more importantly, several recommendations for books about international magical education. The professor's contacts had proven extensive, and within an hour Harry found himself armed with a reading list that promised to illuminate everything Hogwarts had never taught him about the wider wizarding world. "Mr. Potter," Professor McGonagall said quietly as they approached the front counter, "I believe you'll find Mr. Blott quite knowledgeable about international magical institutions. He spent several years working in magical libraries across Europe before returning to London." The man behind the counter looked up from a ledger he was updating with a quill that appeared to be writing on its own. He was perhaps 60 years old, with ink-stained fingers and the kind of gentle, scholarly demeanor that immediately put Harry at ease. His eyes, magnified slightly behind wire-rimmed spectacles, brightened with genuine interest when Professor McGonagall introduced Harry. "Ah, Mr. Potter," Mr. Blott said, extending a hand that felt surprisingly strong despite its delicate appearance. "An honor to meet you. I understand you're researching international magical education. Fascinating subject, and one that's often overlooked in British magical society, I'm afraid." Harry found himself relaxing for the first time all day. "Yes, sir. I've received an invitation from Beauxbatons Academy, and I'd like to learn more about what they offer compared to other schools." Mr. Blott's eyebrows rose with what appeared to be genuine delight. "Beauxbatons? Excellent institution, absolutely excellent. One of the finest magical schools in the world, though I suppose I shouldn't say that too loudly in present company." Professor McGonagall snorted with what might have been amusement. "Nonsense, Harold. Academic excellence should be acknowledged wherever it's found. Mr. Potter deserves accurate information, not patriotic propaganda." Mr. Blott beamed and gestured for them to follow him deeper into the shop. "Let me show you what we have on comparative magical education. And Mr. Potter, I should mention that I have some personal insights that might interest you regarding your parents' time at Beauxbatons." Harry's heart jumped. "You knew my parents. Not personally, I'm afraid, but I was working at the Bibliothèque Magique in Paris during their exchange term. Their research was quite remarkable, actually. Created quite a stir in international, magical, academic circles. They led Harry to a section of the bookshop dedicated to educational texts, where Mr. Blott began pulling volumes from the shelves with practiced efficiency. He handed Harry a slim blue book titled Magical Education in Europe, a comparative analysis, followed by a thicker volume called The History of International Magical Cooperation. "Now then," Mr. Blott said, settling onto a convenient reading chair that appeared to have materialized from nowhere, "let me tell you what I know about Beauxbatons Academy, and why your parents' work there was so significant." Harry opened the comparative analysis book and found himself immediately absorbed in detailed descriptions of different magical schools' approaches to education. Beauxbatons, according to the text, emphasized artistic magical expression alongside academic rigor, with particular strengths in transfiguration, charms, and magical theory. Their students typically demonstrated advanced magical ability by their 4th year, and the school's alumni network included some of the most influential magical researchers and policymakers in Europe. But it was Mr. Blott's personal account that truly captured Harry's attention. "Your parents," he explained, "were part of a summer exchange program during their 6th year at Hogwarts. They were studying advanced protective magic theory, which was Beauxbatons' particular specialty at the time." "Protective magic?" Harry repeated, thinking of Professor Dumbledore's explanation about the blood protections that kept him safe. Indeed. The theory and practical application of magical protection had been somewhat neglected in British magical education, but the French approach was far more sophisticated. Your parents were working on a revolutionary concept, the idea that protective magic could be anchored not just in location or object, but in relationship and sacrifice. Professor McGonagall leaned forward with interest. I remember James and Lily mentioning their research, but I never fully understood the scope of what they were attempting. Mr. Blott nodded enthusiastically. They were developing what they called familial resonance protections. The theory was that magical protection could be transferred between family members through willing sacrifice, creating a network of safety that could span great distances and even survive the death of the original caster. Harry felt his breath catch, the magic his mother had used to save him. She hadn't just died to protect him. She had used research they had done together at Beauxbatons to create something unprecedented. Professor McGonagall was very quiet for a moment. Harold, are you saying that Lily's protection of Harry wasn't just instinctive magic, but a deliberate application of their research? That's exactly what I'm saying. Mr. Blott pulled another book from a nearby shelf, this one bound in deep green leather with silver clasps. James and Lily published a preliminary paper on their theory in the Journal of Applied Magical Protection. It caused quite a sensation because they had successfully demonstrated the technique on a small scale. He opened the book to a marked page and showed Harry a formal academic paper titled Innovative Applications of Sacrifice-Based Protection, Magic by James Potter and Lily Evans. Seeing his parents' names in print associated with groundbreaking magical research made Harry feel something he couldn't quite name. Pride, perhaps, mixed with a deep sadness for all the conversations they would never have about magic and learning. The fascinating thing, Mr. Blott continued, is that their research was largely ignored in Britain. The magical community here tends to be rather insular, dismissive of foreign magical techniques. But at Beauxbatons, their work became foundational to the advanced protection curriculum. Harry looked up from the paper he was reading. So Beauxbatons still teaches their methods? Oh yes. In fact, according to my contacts at the academy, their techniques have been refined and expanded considerably in the years since your parents' research. Students in the advanced program learn protection magic that would astonish most British wizards. The implications of this were staggering. Harry's parents had developed innovative magical techniques that were still being taught and improved upon, but only in France. Their own magical community had essentially ignored their contributions. Professor McGonagall cleared her throat delicately. Mr. Potter, perhaps you should know that the Beauxbatons curriculum is considerably more advanced than what we offer at Hogwarts, particularly in the areas your parents specialized in. Harry looked at her in surprise. You mean I could learn magic that isn't taught at Hogwarts? Not just different magic, Mr. Blott interjected. More advanced magic. Beauxbatons students typically master charms and transfigurations in their 4th year that aren't introduced at Hogwarts until 7th year, if at all. He pulled out another book, this one showing side-by-side comparisons of curricula from various magical schools. The differences were stark. Where Hogwarts focused heavily on practical application and tradition, Beauxbatons emphasized theoretical understanding and innovation. Where Hogwarts taught defense against the dark arts as a separate subject, Beauxbatons integrated protective magic throughout their entire curriculum. But perhaps most striking was the section on international magical cooperation. Beauxbatons students regularly participated in exchange programs, joint research projects, and collaborative magical endeavors with students from around the world. They graduated with a genuinely international perspective on magical application and theory. Mr. Potter, Professor McGonagall said quietly, I think you should also know about the scholarship they've offered you. Harry pulled out the Beauxbatons letter again and read through it more carefully than he had that morning. The scholarship covered full tuition and boarding, which was generous enough, but the advanced studies program mentioned in the letter was apparently something quite extraordinary. Mr. Blott examined the letter with evident excitement. My word, this is their Premier Scholar program. Mr. Potter, this is extraordinarily rare. They typically offer only 1 or 2 of these scholarships per year, and usually to students who have already demonstrated exceptional magical ability. But I haven't demonstrated anything, Harry protested. I didn't even know I was magical until 2 days ago. Mr. Blott and Professor McGonagall exchanged a meaningful look. Mr. Potter, Professor McGonagall said carefully, your magical signature is quite remarkable. The accidental magic you performed as a child would have been monitored by magical institutions worldwide. Your ability to survive the killing curse alone marks you as magically exceptional. This was news to Harry, though perhaps it shouldn't have been. He'd always known there was something different about him, something that allowed him to make impossible things happen when he was upset or desperate. To learn that this marked him as unusually powerful was both thrilling and somewhat overwhelming. The Premier Scholar program, Mr. Blott continued, provides access to magical instruction typically reserved for graduate-level students. You would study alongside the Academy's most advanced pupils and have access to their restricted magical library. The opportunity for academic advancement would be extraordinary. Harry found himself imagining what it might be like to study magic at such an advanced level, to learn techniques that even adult wizards in Britain had never encountered. The prospect was intoxicating in a way that simple acceptance to Hogwarts had never been. But there's more you should know, Professor McGonagall said. I've received responses to my inquiries about other schools that extended invitations. Harry's heart lurched. How many others? 3 additional institutions sent formal invitations. Durmstrang Institute in Northern Europe, Ilvermorny School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in America, and somewhat surprisingly, Mahutakoro School of Magic in Japan. The room felt suddenly very warm. Harry stared at Professor McGonagall, trying to process what she was telling him. 4 international magical schools had wanted him badly enough to send formal invitations, all of which had been intercepted and hidden. Mr. Blott was already moving toward another section of the shop, returning with an armful of books about magical schools worldwide. Each of these institutions is remarkable in its own way, he said, spreading the volumes across a nearby table. Durmstrang focuses heavily on the dark arts, both defensive and theoretical. Not evil magic, mind you, but they're far more willing to teach students about darker magical practices than most schools. He opened a book to show illustrations of Durmstrang's imposing castle and descriptions of their rigorous academic standards. Their students are among the most magically powerful in Europe by graduation, though their methods can be quite intense. Ilvermorny, he continued, opening another volume, represents the American approach to magical education. Very practical, very innovative, with a strong emphasis on magical engineering and spell creation. American wizards tend to be quite inventive in their magical applications. And Mahutakoro, Professor McGonagall added, consulting one of the books, is perhaps the most exclusive magical institution in the world. They accept only students who demonstrate truly exceptional magical potential, and their graduates are considered among the finest magical practitioners anywhere. Harry felt overwhelmed by the scope of opportunities that had been hidden from him. Each school offered something unique, something valuable. Each represented a path his life might take that would be completely different from the traditional British magical education. Professor, he asked finally, why do you think Professor Dumbledore hid all of these from me? Professor McGonagall was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering her words carefully. I believe the headmaster genuinely fears for your safety, Mr. Potter. But I also think he may not fully appreciate the value of international magical education. British magical society can be quite insular. Mr. Blott nodded agreement. There's a long-standing tradition in Britain of believing that Hogwarts provides the finest magical education available. It's simply not true, particularly not in specialized areas. but the belief persists. Harry looked down at the Beauxbatons letter again, then at the books describing other magical institutions around the world. The contrast with his morning expectations was startling. He had awakened thinking his choice was between attending Hogwarts or somehow remaining in the Muggle world. Now he was discovering that he had options he had never dreamed of. "Professor McGonagall," he said finally, "what would you do in my position?" The professor considered this carefully. "Mr. Potter, I believe every young person deserves the opportunity to receive the best education available to them. If I were in your position, I would want to understand exactly what each school could offer me, and then make the decision based on my own goals and interests, rather than someone else's fears." "That's sensible advice," Mr. Blott agreed, "though I should mention that if you're considering Beauxbatons seriously, you might want to speak with someone who has more recent experience with the Academy." "Do you know anyone?" Harry asked hopefully. Professor McGonagall smiled slightly. "As it happens, I do. There's a young woman working at Gringotts who graduated from Beauxbatons 3 years ago. Fleur Delacour. She's been helping with international magical banking protocols, and I believe she would be willing to speak with you about her experiences." The idea of talking to someone closer to his own age who had actually attended Beauxbatons was appealing. Harry nodded eagerly. "Could we arrange that?" "I'll send an owl this afternoon," Professor McGonagall promised. "In the meantime, I suggest you take these books home and read through them carefully. You have until the end of July to make your decision, so there's time to gather all the information you need." Mr. Blott helped them package the books into a bag that was clearly charmed to hold far more than its size should have allowed. As they prepared to leave the shop, he placed a gentle hand on Harry's shoulder. "Mr. Potter," he said quietly, "I knew your parents only through their work, but I can tell you that they would be immensely proud of the questions you're asking and the thoughtfulness you're bringing to this decision. They believed deeply in the value of magical knowledge and international cooperation. I think they would want you to choose the path that offers you the greatest opportunity to learn and grow." As Harry and Professor McGonagall made their way back through Diagon Alley, Harry's mind was spinning with possibilities. The morning's shopping trip had transformed from a simple matter of gathering school supplies into an exploration of educational opportunities he had never imagined. The weight of the books in his bag felt substantial, but not burdensome. Each volume represented knowledge about magical education that could help him make the most important decision of his young life. For the first time since discovering he was a wizard, Harry felt like he was truly in control of his own future. "Professor McGonagall," he said, as they prepared to return to Privet Drive, "thank you for helping me understand my options. I know this probably isn't what Professor Dumbledore intended when he asked you to take me shopping." Professor McGonagall paused, considering her response carefully. "Mr. Potter, Professor Dumbledore is a great wizard and a good man. But he is not infallible. Every student deserves the opportunity to make informed choices about their education. That's not disloyalty to Hogwarts. It's simple fairness." As they apparated back to Little Whinging, Harry clutched his bag of books and felt a growing excitement about the research ahead of him. Somewhere in these pages was the information he needed to choose his path forward, the path that would shape not just his magical education, but quite possibly his entire life. That evening, alone in his bedroom at Privet Drive, Harry spread the books across his narrow bed and began to read in earnest. The international magical world was far larger and more complex than he had ever imagined, filled with opportunities and possibilities that made his heart race with anticipation. Whatever decision he made, it would be his own choice, made with full knowledge of all his options. After a lifetime of having choices made for him by others, the responsibility felt both terrifying and exhilarating. But as Harry read about advanced magical theory and international cooperation, about students his age mastering magic that British wizards never encountered, he found his excitement growing stronger than his fear. The future was full of possibilities he had never dared to imagine. And for the first time in his life, Harry Potter was going to choose his own destiny. The owl arrived at precisely 8 o'clock in the morning, 3 days after Harry's visit to Flourish and Blotts. He had been expecting it, having spent the intervening time immersed in the books Professor McGonagall had helped him acquire, but seeing the official Hogwarts seal on the envelope still made his stomach clench with nervous anticipation. The letter was brief and formal. Professor Dumbledore requested Harry's presence at Hogwarts at his earliest convenience to discuss his educational options before the September 1st deadline. The tone was courteous, but carried an undertone that suggested this was not really a request, so much as a politely worded summons. Harry had used the 3 days well. His research into international magical education had been revelatory, painting a picture of opportunities and advanced magical knowledge that made his original excitement about Hogwarts seem almost quaint by comparison. More importantly, he had spent considerable time thinking about what Professor Dumbledore had told him regarding the threats to his safety and the protective magic that bound him to Britain. The more Harry considered it, the more questions he had. If the protection was truly anchored in his blood relationship to Aunt Petunia, why couldn't it extend to France, which was barely a few hundred miles away? If Voldemort was expected to return eventually anyway, wouldn't it be better for Harry to receive the most advanced magical education possible, regardless of location? And perhaps most troublingly, if Professor Dumbledore was genuinely concerned about Harry's welfare, why had he left him with relatives who treated him with such casual cruelty for 10 years? By the time Harry arrived at Hogwarts that morning, accompanied once again by Professor McGonagall, he had made several decisions about how he intended to handle this conversation. He was not going to be talked out of his right to choose his own educational path, and he was not going to accept vague reassurances about threats he wasn't allowed to understand. Professor Dumbledore's office was reached by way of a spiral staircase behind a stone gargoyle that sprang aside when Professor McGonagall murmured the password, Phoenix Feather. The office itself was a circular room lined with portraits of previous Hogwarts headmasters, most of whom appeared to be dozing in their frames, though Harry caught several of them watching him with frank curiosity. Professor Dumbledore rose from behind an enormous desk carved from what appeared to be a single piece of dark wood. His blue eyes, magnified slightly by half-moon spectacles, settled on Harry with an expression that managed to be both grandfatherly and somehow penetrating. "Ah, Harry," the headmaster said warmly, gesturing toward a comfortable chair positioned in front of his desk. "Thank you for coming. I trust you've had time to consider our previous conversation." Harry seated himself carefully, placing the stack of books he had brought on the floor beside his chair. "Professor Dumbledore, I've spent the last 3 days researching international magical education, and I have some questions about what you told me." The headmaster's expression didn't change, but Harry caught something that might have been resignation in those ancient blue eyes. "Of course you do. You've always been remarkably curious, even as a small child." Professor McGonagall took a seat slightly to one side, close enough to participate in the conversation, but positioned in a way that suggested she was there as an observer rather than an advocate for either position. Harry opened the first of his books and consulted a page he had marked with a slip of parchment. "Professor, you mentioned that the protection my mother created for me would be weakened if I left Britain. But according to this analysis of protective magic theory, sacrificial protections aren't typically bound to geographical location unless they're deliberately anchored to a specific place." Professor Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious. "You've been doing quite thorough research?" "I have." Harry turned to another marked page. "James and Lily Potter's published research on familial resonance protections suggests that the magic my mother used should actually grow stronger through emotional connection and shared experience, not weaker through distance." The silence in the office stretched uncomfortably long. Several of the portraits had apparently given up any pretense of sleep and were watching the conversation with open interest. Finally, Professor Dumbledore sighed deeply. Harry, the protection your mother created for you is indeed based on the research she and your father conducted at Beauxbatons. However, I took certain additional steps to anchor that protection to your aunt's home, and, by extension, to Britain itself. Harry felt his chest tighten. You modified my mother's protection magic. I reinforced it. The headmaster's voice remained calm, but Harry detected a note of defensiveness. The original protection, while innovative and powerful, left certain vulnerabilities. I felt it necessary to provide additional safeguards, without consulting anyone. Harry's voice was carefully controlled, though he could feel anger building in his chest. You modified magical protections created by my parents without telling anyone what you were doing. Professor McGonagall leaned forward slightly. Albus, I think Mr. Potter deserves a complete explanation of what magical protections currently surround him and what modifications you made to his parents' work. Professor Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled in front of his face. Finally, he stood and moved to one of the windows overlooking the Hogwarts grounds. Very well, Harry. The original protection your mother created would indeed have followed you anywhere in the magical world. It was anchored in love and sacrifice, as your parents' research suggested. However, it also had a significant limitation. It could only protect you from Voldemort himself, not from his followers or other magical threats. Harry frowned. So you changed it. I expanded it. The headmaster turned back toward Harry, his expression grave. I bound the original protection to the ancient magic that protects Hogwarts and to the blood wards I established around your aunt's home. The result is a network of magical protection that guards you against a much wider range of threats. And this network only works in Britain, Harry said flatly. The protections are strongest here. Yes, they would be significantly diminished in other countries, particularly if you were to take up permanent residence elsewhere. Harry considered this information carefully. He could understand the logic behind Professor Dumbledore's actions, but the fact remained that these decisions had been made without consultation and had effectively trapped him in a particular educational path. Professor, he said finally, I appreciate that you were trying to keep me safe, but you made fundamental changes to magic my parents created without telling me, and you used those changes to justify hiding educational opportunities from me. I don't think that's acceptable. Professor Dumbledore returned to his seat, looking suddenly very old. Harry, I understand your frustration, but you must understand that the magical world can be extraordinarily dangerous for someone in your unique position. Lord Voldemort has followers throughout Europe. At Beauxbatons, I could not guarantee your safety the way I can at Hogwarts. Harry opened another of his books. This one focused on magical security and international cooperation. According to this, Beauxbatons has some of the most sophisticated protective wards in the magical world. The French Ministry of Magic has extensive experience dealing with international magical threats, and the Academy itself has never had a student harmed by outside forces in over 200 years. The headmaster's eyebrows rose slightly. You have indeed been thorough in your research. I have. And I've learned something else interesting. Harry consulted another marked page. There are no restrictions in British magical law that would prevent me from attending a foreign magical institution. The choice is entirely mine to make. Professor McGonagall cleared her throat delicately. Mr. Potter is correct, Albus. While it's traditional for British magical children to attend Hogwarts, there's no legal requirement to do so. Professor Dumbledore nodded slowly. That is true. However, Harry, I must ask you to consider carefully whether the educational advantages you perceive at Beauxbatons are worth the very real risks you would be taking. Harry had anticipated this argument and was ready with his response. Professor, with respect, the risks exist regardless of where I go to school. You've told me that Voldemort will return eventually. When that happens, wouldn't I be better prepared if I had received the most advanced magical education possible? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Harry could see Professor Dumbledore wrestling with the logic of his argument, could see the moment when the older wizard realized that his own reasoning supported Harry's position rather than undermining it. Moreover, Harry continued, my parents clearly believed that international magical cooperation was valuable. They spent time at Beauxbatons developing innovative magical techniques. Their research is still being taught and expanded upon there. Wouldn't learning those techniques honor their memory and make me more capable of defending myself and others? Professor McGonagall was watching Professor Dumbledore carefully, and Harry thought he saw approval in her stern features. The portraits around the office had given up any pretense of sleep and were following the conversation with rapt attention. Professor Dumbledore was quiet for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been regret. Harry, you are quite right that your parents valued international magical cooperation. They were both extraordinarily gifted individuals who believed deeply in the importance of expanding magical knowledge beyond traditional boundaries. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I suppose I have been allowing my fears for your safety to override my respect for their values and their wishes for your education. Harry felt a flicker of hope, but remained cautious. Does that mean you'll support my right to consider other schools? It means I will not stand in your way if you choose to pursue magical education elsewhere. However, I do ask that you consider the full implications of such a decision. Harry nodded. I've been thinking about nothing else for 3 days, Professor. But I'd like to ask you some specific questions about the threats you're concerned about. Of course. Harry consulted his notes. If Voldemort's followers are active throughout Europe, why haven't they attacked other high-profile targets? Why haven't they gone after international magical leaders or other famous wizards who don't have special protection? Professor Dumbledore considered this carefully. There have been attacks on international figures, though they're often not widely reported. However, you raise a valid point. The Death Eaters have been relatively quiet since Voldemort's defeat, and their activities have been largely confined to Britain. And if I were at Beauxbatons, wouldn't attacking me there risk starting an international magical incident? France wouldn't tolerate foreign terrorists attacking their premier magical institution. The headmaster nodded slowly. That is also true. The political ramifications of such an attack would be considerable. Harry felt his confidence growing. Professor, I'm not trying to be reckless. I understand that there are dangers in the magical world, but it seems to me that the educational advantages of attending Beauxbatons might outweigh the security risks, especially given their own protective capabilities. Professor McGonagall spoke for the first time in several minutes. Mr. Potter, have you given thought to what you hope to accomplish with your magical education? Harry turned to face her. I want to learn everything I can about magic, especially the techniques my parents developed. I want to understand how to protect people, how to fight against dark magic, how to make a positive contribution to the magical world. From what I've read, Beauxbatons offers opportunities to pursue those goals that Hogwarts simply doesn't match. Professor Dumbledore leaned forward, his blue eyes intent on Harry's face. And what of your friends, Harry? Have you considered that attending school in France would mean leaving behind the relationships you might form at Hogwarts? Harry had anticipated this question as well. Professor, I haven't had the opportunity to form any friendships yet. The relationships I might miss are hypothetical, but the educational opportunities at Beauxbatons are real and documented. He opened his final book, the one containing detailed information about the Premier Scholar program. This scholarship they've offered me provides access to magical instruction that's typically reserved for graduate students. I would study alongside the Academy's most advanced pupils and have access to their restricted magical library. I can't think of any friendship that would be worth giving up that kind of educational opportunity. The office fell quiet again. Harry could hear the soft ticking of several magical instruments on Professor Dumbledore's desk, could see dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the tall windows. The weight of decision hung in the air between them. Finally, Professor Dumbledore spoke. "Harry, if you are truly determined to pursue your education at Beauxbatons, I will not prevent you from doing so. However, I do ask that you maintain contact with Professor McGonagall and myself. Should any threats emerge, I want you to have a way to seek help." Harry felt a rush of relief, so profound it was almost dizzying. "Thank you, Professor. I promise to stay in contact and to let you know if anything concerning happens." Professor McGonagall cleared her throat. "Mr. Potter, if you're serious about accepting the Beauxbatons offer, you'll need to send your acceptance soon. Foreign magical institutions typically require responses by early August." Harry nodded. "I'd like to meet with the Beauxbatons graduate you mentioned, Miss Delacour, before making my final decision. But yes, I'm leaning strongly toward accepting their offer." Professor Dumbledore stood and moved to his desk, where he began writing on a piece of parchment with a long quill pen. "I'll provide you with a letter of recommendation, should Beauxbatons require one. And Harry, despite my concerns about your safety, I want you to know that I respect your decision to take control of your own educational future." The headmaster handed Harry the letter he had written. "Your parents would be proud of the thoughtfulness and determination you've shown in researching your options. James and Lily always believed that magical education should expand horizons rather than limit them." As Harry and Professor McGonagall prepared to leave the office, Professor Dumbledore spoke once more. "Harry, promise me that you'll be careful. The magical world beyond Britain can be wonderful, but it can also be dangerous in ways you may not anticipate." "I promise, Professor. And thank you for understanding why this is important to me." As they descended the spiral staircase from the headmaster's office, Harry felt as though a tremendous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time since discovering he was a wizard, he felt truly free to choose his own path forward. Professor McGonagall was unusually quiet as they walked through the castle corridors, but as they approached the entrance hall, she spoke. "Mr. Potter, I want you to know that I think you've handled this situation with remarkable maturity. Standing up to Professor Dumbledore couldn't have been easy, but you did so respectfully and with solid reasoning to support your position. Thank you, Professor. That means a lot coming from you." She paused at the entrance to the great hall. "I've arranged for you to meet with Miss Delacour tomorrow afternoon at Gringotts. She's expecting you, and is quite enthusiastic about discussing her experiences at Beauxbatons." Harry felt his excitement building again. "Perfect. I'm looking forward to hearing about the academy from someone who actually studied there." As they prepared to leave Hogwarts, Harry took one last look around the magnificent entrance hall. The castle was undeniably impressive, steeped in history and magical tradition, but it no longer felt like the only path available to him. It was one option among many, and he was finally free to choose the one that offered him the greatest opportunity to learn and grow. The future stretched ahead of him, full of possibilities he had never dared to imagine. And for the first time in his life, Harry Potter was going to choose his own destiny without anyone else making that decision for him. By the time they apparated back to Privet Drive, Harry had made up his mind. He was going to accept the Beauxbatons offer. Tomorrow's meeting with Fleur Delacour would be the final step in his research, but he already knew what his answer would be. Hogwarts had been his introduction to the magical world, but Beauxbatons would be his true beginning as a wizard. And that beginning would honor his parents' memory while giving him the tools he needed to protect himself and others in whatever challenges lay ahead. The letter from Beauxbatons felt warm in his pocket as Harry climbed the stairs to his bedroom at number 4 Privet Drive. Soon, very soon, he would write his acceptance and begin preparing for a magical education beyond anything he had previously imagined possible. His parents had believed in international magical cooperation, in expanding knowledge beyond traditional boundaries, in the value of learning from different magical traditions. Tomorrow, Harry would take the first step toward following in their footsteps. The morning of Harry's meeting with Fleur Delacour dawned bright and uncommonly warm for late July, though Harry barely noticed the weather as he sat at the small desk in his bedroom, carefully composing his acceptance letter to Beauxbatons Academy. The parchment before him was the finest he had been able to purchase in Diagon Alley, cream-coloured and heavy with a subtle texture that spoke of quality without ostentation. "Dear Madame Maxime," he wrote in his most careful handwriting, "I am honoured to accept your generous offer of admission to Beauxbatons Academy of Magic and the Premier Scholar Programme. After extensive research into international magical education, I am convinced that Beauxbatons offers the academic opportunities I need to honour my parents' legacy and prepare for whatever challenges may await me in the magical world." He paused, considering how to phrase the next section. The letter needed to acknowledge the unusual circumstances of his acceptance while maintaining the formal tone appropriate for international correspondence. "I understand that my decision to attend Beauxbatons rather than Hogwarts may be unexpected, given the traditional educational paths for British magical students. However, I believe that the international perspective and advanced magical instruction available at your academy will serve me well throughout my magical career." Harry signed the letter with a flourish and set it aside to dry. He would send it by owl immediately after his conversation with Miss Delacour, assuming their meeting confirmed his decision. Though honestly, at this point, he couldn't imagine anything that would change his mind about accepting the Beauxbatons offer. The stack of books on his desk represented 3 days of intensive research into every aspect of international magical education he could find. He had read detailed accounts of curriculum differences, studied comparative analyses of magical instruction techniques, and absorbed everything available about the specific programs and opportunities available at various international institutions. What had emerged from his research was a picture of magical education far more sophisticated and comprehensive than anything offered in Britain. Beauxbatons students didn't just learn to cast spells, they studied the theoretical foundations that made magic possible. They didn't just memorize potions recipes, they learned to innovate and improve upon existing formulations. Most importantly, they were encouraged to think creatively about magical applications rather than simply following established traditions. The prospect of studying alongside the Academy's most advanced students as part of the Premier Scholar Programme was particularly exciting. According to the materials Professor McGonagall had helped him gather, participants in that programme often published original magical research before graduating, contributed to ongoing Academy projects, and frequently received offers to continue their studies at magical universities throughout Europe. Harry had never imagined that magical universities existed, much less that he might have the opportunity to attend one. The British magical world seemed remarkably insular by comparison, focused almost exclusively on Hogwarts as both the beginning and end of formal magical education. A sharp tap at his window interrupted his thoughts. A beautiful tawny owl waited on the windowsill, bearing a letter sealed with emerald wax. Harry opened the window and accepted the letter, offering the owl a drink of water from a small dish he kept on his desk. The letter was from Professor McGonagall, confirming his appointment with Miss Delacour for 2 o'clock that afternoon, and providing detailed instructions for finding her office within Gringotts. The professor had also included a brief note mentioning that she had spoken with Madame Maxime personally, and that the Beauxbatons headmistress was delighted by Harry's interest in the academy. Harry felt a flutter of nervous excitement as he prepared for the afternoon meeting. This would be his first opportunity to speak with someone who had actually experienced the Beauxbatons educational environment, someone who could provide insights that no amount of reading could match. He dressed carefully in his best muggle clothes, wanting to make a good impression while acknowledging that he had no idea what constituted appropriate attire for meeting with a Beauxbatons graduate in a professional setting. The books had provided detailed information about magical curriculum and academic opportunities, but had been notably lacking in guidance about social customs and expectations. Professor McGonagall met him at the Leaky Cauldron precisely at 1:30, looking as composed and efficient as always. Her greeting was warmer than usual, though, suggesting that she approved of the initiative Harry was showing in researching his educational options. "Mr. Potter," she said, as they made their way through Diagon Alley toward the imposing white marble facade of Gringotts. "I should mention that Miss Delacour is quite enthusiastic about discussing her experiences at Beauxbatons. Apparently the Academy's international alumni network maintains close connections, and they're always eager to help prospective students." "That's encouraging," Harry replied, though he found himself feeling increasingly nervous as they approached the bank's bronze doors. This would be his first conversation with someone close to his own age since discovering he was a wizard, and he wanted desperately to make a good impression. The interior of Gringotts was even more impressive than Harry remembered from his first visit with Hagrid. The vast marble hall stretched before them, lined with the high desks where goblins worked with precise efficiency. The sound of coins being counted and weighed created a constant metallic symphony that somehow managed to be both chaotic and oddly soothing. Professor McGonagall approached one of the goblin tellers and spoke briefly in what sounded like fluent gobbledygook. The goblin's response was respectful but brief, and within moments they were being escorted through a side door into the administrative sections of the bank. The corridor they entered was significantly quieter than the main banking hall, lined with doors bearing nameplates in multiple languages. The Goblin Guide led them to a door marked with both English and French text, identifying it as the office of the International Magical Banking Protocols Department. Professor McGonagall knocked briskly, and a voice called for them to enter in accented English. The office beyond the door was surprisingly warm and inviting, decorated with what appeared to be a mixture of professional banking materials and personal touches that suggested its occupant had made efforts to create a welcoming workspace. Fleur Delacour rose from behind a desk covered with documents and correspondence, and Harry's first impression was of someone who possessed the kind of effortless elegance he had only read about in books. She was perhaps 18 years old, with silvery blonde hair that caught the light like spun metal, and blue eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence and warmth. "Professor McGonagall," she said, moving around her desk to greet them with a smile that transformed her already beautiful features into something truly luminous. "And you must be Harry Potter. I am so pleased to meet you." Her accent was distinctly French, but her English was excellent, spoken with the kind of careful precision that suggested she took pride in mastering multiple languages. Harry found himself momentarily tongue-tied, though whether from nervousness about the conversation ahead or simple amazement at meeting someone so obviously sophisticated, he couldn't quite determine. "Miss Delacour," Professor McGonagall said smoothly, "thank you for agreeing to speak with Mr. Potter about your experiences at Beauxbatons. I believe he has some specific questions about the Academy's programs." "But of course," Fleur replied, gesturing for them to take seats in comfortable chairs arranged around a small table near one of the office windows. "I am always happy to speak about Beauxbatons. It is a truly magnificent institution." As they settled into their seats, Harry found his nervousness beginning to fade. There was something about Fleur's manner that put him at ease, a combination of genuine warmth and professional competence that made conversation feel natural despite the formal setting. "Miss Delacour," he began, "I've been offered admission to Beauxbatons through their Premier Scholar program, and I'm trying to understand what that would mean for my magical education." Fleur's eyebrows rose with what appeared to be genuine surprise. "The Premier Scholar program. Mon Dieu, but that is quite remarkable. They typically offer only one or two of those scholarships each year, and usually to students who have already demonstrated exceptional magical ability." "That's what I've been told," Harry replied. "But honestly, I'm not sure why they offered it to me. I only learned I was magical a few weeks ago." Fleur studied him with those intelligent blue eyes, and Harry had the distinct impression that she was seeing more than he intended to reveal. "Ah, but magical ability is not always about what you have learned, Harry. Sometimes it is about what you are capable of learning. The professors at Beauxbatons are very good at recognizing potential." Professor McGonagall leaned forward slightly. "Miss Delacour, Could you tell Mr. Potter about the differences between Beauxbatons' approach to magical education and what he might experience at Hogwarts? Fleur nodded thoughtfully. There are many differences, but perhaps the most important is the emphasis on understanding rather than memorization. At Beauxbatons, we do not simply learn spells and potions. We study the theory behind them, the history of their development, the ways they can be improved or adapted for new purposes. She gestured toward a bookshelf lined with volumes in multiple languages. The Academy encourages original thinking, creativity in magical application. Students are expected to contribute to the development of magical knowledge, not simply consume it. Harry felt his excitement building. That sounds exactly like what I'm hoping for. I've been reading about the research my parents did during their exchange term at Beauxbatons, and I'd love the opportunity to build on their work. Fleur's expression grew more serious. Ah, yes, the work of James and Lily Potter. Zaire research is still taught in our advanced protection classes. Quite revolutionary, really. The idea that sacrificial magic could be anchored in relationship rather than location was considered impossible until they proved otherwise. You studied their techniques? Harry asked eagerly. But of course, all Beauxbatons students learn the fundamentals of their protective theory in their 4th year. The advanced applications are taught to students in the special programs. If you were to join the Premier Scholar program, you would have access to the complete archives of their research. The prospect of studying his parents' work in detail, of understanding the magical techniques that had saved his life, was almost overwhelming. Harry had dreamed of feeling connected to his parents' memory, but he had never imagined he might have the opportunity to literally follow in their academic footsteps. Miss Delacour, Professor McGonagall interjected, "Could you describe the social environment at Beauxbatons? Mr. Potter has expressed some concern about adapting to a foreign institution." Fleur smiled warmly. "The Academy is very international in its outlook, Professor McGonagall. We have students from throughout Europe and beyond. Learning to work with people from different magical traditions is considered an essential part of the education." She turned toward Harry. "You would find, I think, that your British background would be welcomed rather than seen as unusual. The Academy values diversity of magical perspective." "What about the language barrier?" Harry asked. "My French is practically non-existent." Fleur laughed, a sound like silver bells. "That is not a concern. The Academy has excellent language instruction, and many classes are conducted in English to accommodate international students. You would be fluent in French within your 1st year, but it would not prevent you from succeeding academically." Harry felt another barrier to his acceptance of the Beauxbatons offer dissolving. The language concern had been weighing on him more than he had admitted, even to himself. "What about the advanced studies program specifically?" he asked. "What would that mean for my daily experience at the Academy?" Fleur's expression grew more serious, though her enthusiasm remained evident. "The advanced studies program is quite intensive, Harry. You would take the normal 1st-year curriculum, but you would also have access to classes typically reserved for 5th and 6th-year students. The workload is considerable." She paused, studying his face. "But the opportunities are extraordinary. Advanced studies students often work directly with Academy professors on their research projects. They have access to the restricted sections of the library. Most importantly, they learn to think like magical researchers rather than simply magical practitioners." "That sounds perfect," Harry said without hesitation. "I want to learn everything I can about magic, especially the more advanced applications." Professor McGonagall cleared her throat delicately. "Mr. Potter, you should understand that accepting such an intensive program would mean giving up many of the social activities that typically occupy students your age." Fleur nodded agreement. "The advanced studies students work very hard. Professor McGonagall is correct. But they also form very close friendships with each other. The shared experience of intensive learning creates strong bonds." Harry considered this. "Honestly, I've never had many friends my own age anyway. The idea of studying alongside other students who are serious about learning sounds wonderful. "Then I think," Fleur said with a smile that suggested approval, "that you would thrive at Beauxbatons. The Academy rewards curiosity and dedication above all else." The conversation continued for another hour, with Fleur providing detailed descriptions of Academy life, from the magnificent palace that housed the school to the traditions that governed student interaction. She spoke enthusiastically about the international magical cooperation projects that students participated in, the research opportunities available through Academy partnerships with magical institutions throughout Europe, and the network of alumni who maintained close connections long after graduation. By the time Professor McGonagall indicated that they should conclude the meeting, Harry was more convinced than ever that accepting the Beauxbatons offer was the right decision. Everything Fleur had described aligned perfectly with his hopes for his magical education. As they prepared to leave, Fleur handed Harry a small package wrapped in elegant paper. "A small gift," she said, with a warm smile. "Some materials that might help you prepare for the Academy if you decide to accept their offer." Harry accepted the package gratefully. "Miss Delacour, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. You've helped me understand what accepting this opportunity would really mean." "It has been my pleasure, Ori. And if you do decide to attend Beauxbatons, please know that the Academy alumni are always available to help new students adapt to their new environment." As they made their way back through Gringotts toward Diagon Alley, Professor McGonagall was unusually quiet. Finally, as they reached the marble steps leading down from the bank, she spoke. "Mr. Potter, I believe you've made your decision about Beauxbatons." "Yes, Professor. I'm going to accept their offer. Everything Miss Delacour described sounds exactly like what I'm hoping for from my magical education." Professor McGonagall nodded approvingly. "I think you're making the right choice for your particular goals and interests. Beauxbatons will challenge you academically in ways that Hogwarts simply couldn't match." They paused at the entrance to Diagon Alley, the afternoon crowds swirling around them with typical magical chaos. Harry felt as though he was standing at a crossroads, with his entire future balanced on the decision he had just made. "Professor," he said finally, "will you help me with the practical arrangements for attending Beauxbatons? I'm not sure I understand all the steps I need to take. Of course, Mr. Potter. We'll need to arrange for your school supplies, coordinate your travel to France, and ensure that all the necessary paperwork is completed properly. But first, I suggest you send your acceptance letter to Madame Maxime as soon as possible." Harry nodded, feeling the weight of the letter in his jacket pocket. The acceptance he had written that morning felt like a commitment to an entirely different future than he had imagined possible just a few weeks ago. As they prepared to return to Privet Drive, Harry opened the package Fleur had given him. Inside were several books, including a beginner's guide to French magical terminology, a detailed description of Beauxbatons traditions and customs, and what appeared to be a personal journal describing a student's first-year experience at the Academy. But it was the note tucked between the books that made Harry's heart race with anticipation. Written in Fleur's elegant handwriting were the words, "Welcome to the beginning of your real, magical education. Harry Potter. The Academy is lucky to have you." That evening, alone in his bedroom at No. 4 Privet Drive, Harry carefully sealed his acceptance letter and attached it to the leg of the beautiful tawny owl that had delivered Professor McGonagall's message that morning. As the owl disappeared into the darkening sky, Harry felt as though he was watching his old life disappear with it. Tomorrow, he would begin preparing in earnest for his new life as a student at Beauxbatons Academy of Magic. He would study French, research Academy customs, and prepare himself academically for the intensive program he had committed to joining. But tonight, he allowed himself to simply sit by his window and imagine what it would be like to study in the Palace of Beauxbatons, to learn the advanced magical techniques his parents had helped develop, to become the kind of wizard who could make genuine contributions to the magical world. For the first time in his life, Harry Potter's future felt limitless with possibility, and that future was entirely his own choice to create. The magical coach that came to collect Harry from King's Cross Station was unlike anything he had ever imagined, even after weeks of reading about Beauxbatons Academy and French magical traditions. Where the Hogwarts Express had been impressive in its sturdy, practical magnificence, this vehicle was pure artistry given form and function. The coach itself appeared to be carved from a single piece of pale blue wood that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, decorated with silver inlays that depicted scenes of magical learning and international cooperation. It was drawn by a team of 12 magnificent winged horses that Professor McGonagall had identified as Abraxans, their coats a silver white that made them appear almost ethereal in the late August sunlight. Harry stood on the platform with his trunk and Hedwig's cage, feeling simultaneously nervous and excited as he watched other students boarding the elegant conveyance. The contrast with his send-off to Hogwarts could not have been more stark. Instead of the casual chaos of British magical families seeing their children off to school, this departure felt like a formal ceremony, with parents and students dressed in robes that spoke of both tradition and sophistication. Madame Maxime herself had come to oversee the collection of British students, and Harry's first sight of the Beauxbatons headmistress was genuinely awe-inspiring. She stood nearly 12 feet tall, with an elegance and presence that commanded immediate respect. Her robes were a deep midnight blue, embroidered with silver stars that seemed to move gently across the fabric, and her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style that somehow managed to look both regal and practical. "Ah, Harry Potter," she said, as he approached the coach, her voice carrying the melodic accent he had come to associate with French magical education. "Welcome to the Beauxbatons family. I am so pleased that you have chosen to join us." "Thank you, Madame Maxime," Harry replied, offering a slight bow that felt appropriate given the formal atmosphere. "I'm honored to be here, and excited to begin my studies." "Excellent. The journey to the Academy will take approximately 4 hours, which will give you time to meet your fellow students and begin to understand the Beauxbatons tradition. You will find that we do things somewhat differently than you might expect from British magical education." She gestured toward the coach, where other students were settling themselves in what appeared to be seating that adjusted itself automatically to ensure everyone's comfort. The coach is equipped with translation charms to help students from different countries communicate during the journey. By the time we reach the Academy, you should have no difficulty understanding or speaking with your classmates. Harry climbed into the coach and found himself in an interior that was somehow far more spacious than the external dimensions should have allowed. The seats were upholstered in the same pale blue material as the exterior, with silver embroidery that provided subtle but elegant decoration. Large windows provided panoramic views of the countryside below, and Harry realized with a start that the coach was already airborne, rising smoothly above the London skyline. His fellow passengers were an immediately diverse group, representing what appeared to be at least 6 different countries based on their clothing and the languages he overheard before the translation charms took effect. There were perhaps 20 students total, ranging from what looked like first years to several who appeared to be returning for their final year at the Academy. The student seated across from Harry was perhaps his own age, with dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that suggested both curiosity and confidence. As the translation charms settled into place, the boy leaned forward with a friendly smile. "Bonjour, I am Henri Dubois," he said in accented English that was nonetheless perfectly clear. "I am entering my 2nd year at Beauxbatons. You are the famous Harry Potter, no?" Harry felt his usual discomfort with his celebrity, but Henry's manner was more curious than awed. "Yes, I'm Harry, though I hope to be known for something other than surviving a dark wizard's attack as a baby." Henry laughed, a warm sound that immediately put Harry at ease. "Bien sûr. At Beauxbatons, you will find that students are more interested in what you can do than in what has been done to you. The Academy values magical ability and academic achievement above all else." That's exactly what I was hoping to hear, Harry replied. I'm particularly interested in the Advanced Studies program. Have you had any experience with those classes? Henry's eyebrows rose with what appeared to be genuine respect. The Advanced Studies program. Mon Dieu, but you are ambitious. I have only observed those classes from a distance, but the students who participate are truly remarkable. They work with the professors on original research, often publishing their results before graduation. Another student, a girl with auburn hair and what sounded like a Spanish accent, leaned into their conversation. I am Isabella Mendoza, she said, with a smile that lit up her entire face. I am beginning my 3rd year, and I have seen the Advanced Studies students at work. They are quite impressive, but the workload is extraordinary. Harry felt his excitement building rather than diminishing at this warning. What kind of work do they do, exactly? Isabella exchanged a glance with Henry before responding. Last year, the Advanced Studies first years were working on improving the efficiency of protective ward networks. The second years were researching applications of transfiguration theory to healing magic. The third years were collaborating with the professors on a project involving international magical communication systems. Henry nodded enthusiastically. The Advanced Studies students often present their work at the Academy's monthly research symposiums. Their presentations are attended by visiting scholars from magical institutions throughout Europe. The prospect of presenting original magical research to international scholars was both terrifying and exhilarating. Harry had never imagined that students his age could be involved in such advanced academic work, but everything he learned about Beauxbatons reinforced the impression that this was a fundamentally different approach to magical education than anything available in Britain. As the coach continued its journey southward, Harry found himself drawn into conversations with students from across Europe. There was Dmitri, a serious boy from Bulgaria, who was fascinated by magical theory and spoke 3 languages fluently. Elena, an Italian girl whose enthusiasm for charms work was infectious and who had already mastered several spells typically not taught until 4th year, and Marie, a French student entering her final year, who spoke knowledgeably about the Academy's connections with magical universities and research institutions throughout the world. What struck Harry most forcefully was how naturally these students discussed advanced magical concepts and international cooperation. They spoke of collaboration with students from other schools as a normal part of their education, of professors who were actively engaged in cutting-edge magical research, of expectations that they would contribute meaningfully to the advancement of magical knowledge. Henri, who seemed to have appointed himself as Harry's informal guide to Academy culture, provided running commentary on the landscape passing below them. The Academy is located in the Pyrenees Mountains, he explained, pointing toward the peaks visible in the distance. Their location was chosen specifically because it sits at the intersection of several powerful magical confluences, which enhances the effectiveness of advanced magical instruction. Isabella leaned forward to add her own insights. The palace itself is built on a site that has been magically significant for over 1,000 years. The ancient magic that permeates the grounds makes it easier for students to learn advanced techniques. Harry watched the mountains growing larger as they approached, feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Everything these students described sounded wonderful, but it also represented challenges and expectations far beyond anything he had prepared for. As if sensing his thoughts, Henry placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Do not worry, Harry. The Academy may demand much from its students, but it also provides extraordinary support. The professors are genuinely invested in helping each student reach their full potential. Marie nodded agreement from across the coach. The faculty includes some of the most accomplished magical researchers in Europe. Professor Lemaire, who teaches advanced transfiguration, published the definitive work on metamorphic magic. Professor Dubois, no relation to Henri despite the name, revolutionized the field of protective charms. Professor Chen developed the theoretical framework that underlies modern international magical communication. The caliber of instruction available at Beauxbatons was clearly extraordinary, but Harry found himself wondering whether he would be able to meet the academic standards expected of advanced studies students. His magical education to this point consisted of 3 weeks of reading about magic rather than actually practicing it. Henry seemed to read his expression accurately. Harry, the Academy, has accepted you into the Advanced Studies program because they believe you have the potential to succeed. The professors are very good at recognizing magical ability, even in students who have not yet had formal training. Isabella added her own encouragement. The first-year curriculum is designed to bring all students to the same level of fundamental competency, regardless of their background. You will have additional instruction to help you catch up in areas where your preparation may be lacking. As the coach began its descent toward the academy, Harry got his first clear view of the Palace of Beauxbatons, and the sight quite literally took his breath away. The building was magnificent beyond anything he had imagined, a sprawling complex of towers and courtyards that seemed to blend seamlessly with the mountain landscape around it. The architecture was elegant and graceful, constructed from some kind of pale stone that seemed to glow with its own inner light in the afternoon sun. Gardens surrounded the main buildings, laid out in intricate patterns that were clearly both decorative and functional, incorporating what appeared to be magical plants and features that served educational purposes. A large fountain dominated the central courtyard, and even from this distance, Harry could see that it was fed by water that sparkled with a distinctly magical quality. "Voilà," Henry said with obvious pride, "the Palace of Beauxbatons. Your home for the next 7 years." The coach settled onto a landing platform that appeared to have been carved directly from the mountainside, its surface inlaid with silver patterns that guided arriving vehicles to precise positions. As Harry disembarked with his fellow students, he felt the mountain air crisp and clean in his lungs, carrying scents of pine and stone and something indefinably magical. Madame Maxime had arrived separately and stood waiting to welcome the new students with what appeared to be several faculty members and a group of older students who were clearly there to serve as guides and orientation assistants. Her presence was even more impressive here, in her natural environment, radiating an authority that was both warm and absolutely unquestionable. "Welcome to Beauxbatons Academy of Magic," she announced, in a voice that carried easily across the platform despite the mountain winds. "For those of you who are returning, welcome home. For those who are joining us for the first time, welcome to the beginning of your true magical education." The new students were divided into groups based on their year and house assignments, a process that seemed to happen with far less ceremony than Harry had read about regarding Hogwarts sorting. Henry remained at his side as they were guided toward what appeared to be the main entrance to the palace. "At Beauxbatons," Henri explained quietly, "the house system is less about competition and more about creating supportive communities. The 4 houses represent different aspects of magical learning and practice, and students often collaborate across use lines on academic projects. They approached the main entrance through a courtyard, dominated by the fountain Harry had seen from the air. Up close, it was even more magnificent, with water that seemed to dance in patterns that definitely defied normal physics and statuary, that appeared to shift and change as they watched. "The Fountain of Flamel," Isabella explained, having somehow appeared at Harry's other side. Nicholas and Perenelle Flamel met as students here at Beauxbatons, and they endowed this fountain in gratitude for their education that made their achievements possible. Harry stared at the fountain with new interest. Nicholas Flamel, the alchemist who had created the Philosopher's Stone, had been a student here. The connection to legendary magical achievement was both inspiring and somewhat intimidating. The main hall of the academy was breathtaking, with soaring ceilings supported by columns that appeared to be carved from single pieces of white marble veined with silver. Tapestries depicting scenes of magical learning and international cooperation hung between tall windows that provided spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. The overall effect was one of timeless elegance, and scholarly sophistication. "Attention, students," Madame Maxime called, her voice carrying easily throughout the hall. "The new students will now be sorted into their respective houses. Unlike some institutions, our sorting is based on careful observation and evaluation, rather than a single magical artifact. Each new student will meet briefly with the house heads to determine the most appropriate placement." The sorting process proved to be far more personal and thoughtful than Harry had expected. Rather than a public ceremony, new students were called individually to meet with the 4 house heads in a smaller chamber off the main hall. When Harry's name was announced, Henri squeezed his shoulder encouragingly. "Good luck, mon ami. Though I suspect the choice of house will be obvious once the professors speak with you." Harry entered the smaller chamber to find 4 professors seated at a curved table, each representing one of the academy houses. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming, though Harry could sense the sharp intelligence behind their friendly demeanors. "Monsieur Potter," said a woman with silver hair and kind but penetrating eyes, "I am Professor Dubois, head of Bellefeuille House. We are delighted to welcome you to Beauxbatons." The other professors introduced themselves in turn. Professor Lemaire of Ombre Lune House, Professor Chen of Papillon Lys House, and Professor Moreau of Serpentine House. Each had a distinct personality and approach, but all shared an obvious dedication to magical education and student development. The conversation that followed was unlike anything Harry had expected from a house sorting. Rather than testing his magical knowledge or asking about his preferences, the professors engaged him in a thoughtful discussion about his goals for his magical education, his interests in different areas of study, and his hopes for his future contributions to the magical world. "Your parents' work in protective magic was groundbreaking," Professor Dubois observed. "Have you given thought to continuing their research? I'd like to learn more about what they accomplished before deciding whether to build on it," Harry replied honestly. "But I'm definitely interested in understanding the theoretical foundations of protective magic." Professor Chen leaned forward with interest. "The Advanced Studies program includes significant work in magical theory and research methodology. Are you prepared for the academic rigor that such a program requires?" "I hope so, Professor. I understand that it will be challenging, but I'm committed to working as hard as necessary to succeed." The professors exchanged meaningful glances before Professor Dubois smiled warmly. "Monsieur Potter, I believe you will find your home in Bellefeuille House. We value courage, determination, and the willingness to stand up for what is right. More importantly, we foster students who are committed to using their magical knowledge to protect and serve others." Harry felt a rush of relief and excitement as he accepted the silver and blue scarf that marked him as a member of Bellefeuille House. The professors had clearly given careful thought to his placement, and their reasoning resonated with his own sense of what he hoped to accomplish through his magical education. As he returned to the main hall, wearing his new house colors, Henri greeted him with obvious delight. "Bellefeuille. Excellent choice, though I suppose I should have expected it given your family's reputation for protective magic." Isabella appeared at his side with a warm smile. "Bellefeuille students are known for their dedication to advanced magical study and their willingness to take on challenging projects. You will fit in very well." The evening continued with a welcoming feast that surpassed even Harry's elevated expectations. The great dining hall was illuminated by thousands of floating candles that cast warm light over tables laden with foods from across Europe. As Henry had promised, wood nymphs provided musical entertainment during the meal, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to enhance the flavors of the food itself. But it was the conversation at the Bellefeuille table that truly captured Harry's attention. His new housemates discussed their summer research projects, upcoming academic collaborations with students from other magical institutions, and plans for original magical research they hoped to pursue during the coming year. The level of intellectual engagement and academic ambition was extraordinary. As the evening concluded and students began making their way to their dormitories, Harry found himself walking with Henri and 2 older Bellefeuille students who had volunteered to help him navigate his first days at the academy. "Tomorrow," Henry explained, as they climbed a gracefully curved staircase toward the dormitory towers, "you will have your placement examinations for the Advanced Studies program. The professors will evaluate your current magical knowledge and design a personalized curriculum. That will bring you up to the level required for advanced work." One of the older students, a fourth year named Philippe, added his own guidance. "Do not worry about the examinations, Harry. They are designed to identify your strengths and areas for development, not to exclude you from the program. The Academy is committed to helping every student reach their full potential." As Harry settled into his dormitory room, a comfortable space with a spectacular view of the surrounding mountains, he reflected on the day's experiences. Everything about Beauxbatons had exceeded his expectations, from the magnificent physical environment to the intellectual sophistication of his fellow students to the obvious dedication of the faculty. The academy represented everything he had hoped for from his magical education, and more. Here, he would have the opportunity to learn advanced magical techniques, to contribute to original research, to collaborate with students from across the magical world, and to honor his parents' memory by building on their academic legacy. As he drifted off to sleep in his new home, Harry felt a deep sense of gratitude for the choices that had led him to this moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight he was simply content to be exactly where he belonged. Harry's first week at Beauxbatons Academy passed in a whirlwind of placement examinations, orientation sessions, and intensive French language instruction that left his head spinning with new vocabulary and magical concepts. The Advanced Studies program placement tests had been unlike anything he might have expected, focusing not on memorized knowledge, but on magical intuition, theoretical reasoning, and creative problem-solving. Professor Lemaire, who oversaw the Advanced Studies program, had explained the results with characteristic French precision. "Your magical instincts are quite remarkable, Monsieur Potter," she had said in her crisp accent. "While your formal training is obviously limited, you demonstrate an understanding of magical theory that typically requires years of study to develop." Now, as Harry made his way to his first advanced French magical theory class on Monday morning, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that had become familiar during his first week. The Academy's approach to education was proving to be everything he had hoped for, and considerably more challenging than he had anticipated. The classroom for advanced theory was located in one of the palace's oldest towers, reached by a spiral staircase lined with portraits of famous magical theorists and innovators. Unlike the moving portraits at Hogwarts, these seemed content to observe rather than comment, though Harry had caught several of them nodding approvingly as students passed with particularly complex magical texts. Harry arrived to find the classroom already half full, with students representing what appeared to be at least 4 different year levels. The Advanced Studies program, he had learned, grouped students by ability and interest rather than age, creating learning environments where first-year students might work alongside sixth years if their magical development warranted it. Henri was already seated near the front of the classroom, saving a spot for Harry with the casual assumption of friendship that had characterized their relationship since the coach journey from London. Beside him sat a girl Harry had noticed during orientation week, but hadn't yet had the opportunity to meet properly. She was perhaps a year younger than Harry, with silver blonde hair that caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows, and blue eyes that held depths of intelligence and determination that immediately reminded him of Hermione Granger's description in the letters he had received from his would-be Hogwarts friends. When Henri gestured for Harry to join them, she looked up from the advanced magical theory text she had been studying with a smile that was both warm and somehow assessing. "Harry," Henri said with obvious pleasure, "I would like you to meet Gabrielle Delacour. She is a younger sister of Fleur, whom you met at Gringotts, and she has been placed in the Advanced Studies program, despite being only in her first year." Gabrielle stood gracefully and offered her hand with the kind of natural poise that seemed characteristic of the Delacour family. "Enchanté," Harry Potter, she said in accented English that was even more musical than her sister's. Fleur told me much about your meeting and your decision to come to Beauxbatons. I am very pleased to finally meet you properly. Harry accepted her handshake, immediately struck by both her obvious intelligence and the sense of magical power that seemed to radiate from her despite her young age. The pleasure is mine, Gabrielle. Henry tells me you're also new to the Advanced Studies program. Oui, though I've been at the academy since I was 9 years old. Gabrielle returned to her seat with fluid grace. The Advanced Studies program typically does not accept students until their second year, but they made an exception based on my placement examination results. Before Harry could respond, the classroom door opened and Professor Lemaire entered with the kind of purposeful stride that immediately commanded attention. She was a woman of perhaps 50 years, with steel-grey hair arranged in an elegant chignon and dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Her robes were a deep forest green, embroidered with silver equations that seemed to shift and change as she moved. "Bonjour, students," she said, her voice carrying easily throughout the room despite its conversational volume. "For those who are joining us for the first time, welcome to Advanced French Magical Theory. For those who are returning, I hope you have spent the summer considering the theoretical implications of our spring semester work on protective magic resonance." She moved to the front of the classroom with practiced efficiency, gesturing toward a complex magical equation that appeared on the blackboard, as if summoned by her thoughts. "Today we will begin our exploration of the mathematical foundations underlying all magical practice, starting with the work of Nicolas Flamel on alchemical transformation theory." Harry felt his excitement building as Professor Lemaire launched into a lecture that was unlike any magical instruction he had previously imagined. Rather than simply teaching students to cast spells, she was explaining the underlying principles that made magic possible, the theoretical frameworks that governed magical interaction with the physical world. "The fundamental equation," she continued, writing symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light, describes the relationship between magical intent, environmental resonance, and physical transformation. Understanding this relationship is essential for any serious magical practitioner. Gabrielle leaned closer to Harry, speaking in a whisper that somehow didn't disturb the flow of the lecture. "This is why Beauxbatons students often outperform their international peers in advanced magical applications. We learn not just what works, but why it works." Harry nodded, completely absorbed in Professor Lemaire's explanation of how magical theory could be applied to improve spell efficiency, create new magical effects, and solve complex problems that traditional magical education never addressed. This was exactly the kind of advanced magical knowledge he had hoped to find at Beauxbatons. As the lecture continued, Professor Lemaire began asking questions of individual students, expecting not just correct answers but thoughtful analysis and creative thinking. When she turned her attention to Harry, he felt his heart rate spike despite his growing confidence in the material. "Monsieur Potter," she said, with the slight smile that seemed to be her equivalent of warmth, "given your family's innovative work in protective magic theory, how would you apply the resonance equations to improve the efficiency of existing protective charms?" Harry considered the question carefully, drawing on both the theoretical material Professor Lemaire had just presented and his reading about his parents' research. The resonance equations suggest that protective charms could be strengthened by anchoring them in multiple harmonic frequencies rather than relying on a single magical signature. If you could create a network of interconnected protections that resonated at complementary frequencies, the overall effect should be exponentially more powerful than individual charms. Professor Lemaire's eyebrows rose with what appeared to be genuine surprise and approval. "Excellent reasoning, Monsieur Potter. You have identified the theoretical foundation for your parents' breakthrough in familial protective magic. They were the first to successfully demonstrate harmonic magical resonance in practical application. The rest of the class period passed with similar intensity, covering theoretical concepts that challenged even the most advanced students while providing practical frameworks for magical innovation. By the time Professor Lemaire dismissed them, Harry felt as though his understanding of magic had been fundamentally transformed. As they gathered their books and prepared to leave for their next class, Gabriel turned to Harry with an expression of frank assessment. "You did very well for someone with so little formal magical training, Harry. Your intuitive understanding of magical theory is quite impressive." "Thank you," Harry replied, feeling both pleased and somewhat overwhelmed, though I have to admit, I'm not sure I understood half of what Professor Lemaire was explaining. Henry laughed as they made their way down the spiral staircase toward their next classroom. "That is normal for the first few weeks of advanced theory. The concepts are quite complex, but you will find that they become clearer as you work with them in practical applications." Their next class was Advanced Practical Magic, with Professor Chen, a Chinese wizard whose reputation for innovative magical instruction had apparently attracted students from across Asia to study at Beauxbatons. The classroom was located in a different tower entirely, requiring a walk across one of the palace's covered bridges that provided spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. Professor Chen proved to be a compact man of perhaps 40 years, with an infectious enthusiasm for magical experimentation and a teaching style that emphasized learning through guided discovery rather than passive instruction. His classroom was arranged more like a magical laboratory than a traditional lecture hall, with workstations equipped for practical magical experimentation. Today, Professor Chen announced, as the students settled into their work groups, "We will be exploring the practical applications of the theoretical concepts you are studying with Professor Lemaire. Specifically, we will attempt to improve the efficiency of basic levitation charms using harmonic resonance techniques." Harry found himself grouped with Gabriel, Henri, and a fourth-year student named Victor Volkov, who had introduced himself as a visiting student from Durmstrang Institute. Victor was a serious boy with dark hair and intense grey eyes that suggested both intelligence and a slightly competitive nature. Victor had been observing Harry with frank curiosity since their introduction, and as they began working on their assigned magical exercises, he finally voiced the question that had apparently been troubling him. "I've read about your defeat of the Dark Lord Voldemort as an infant, Harry Potter. But I am curious about your actual magical ability. Fame in the magical world does not always correspond to genuine skill." Harry appreciated Victor's direct approach, even if the question was somewhat uncomfortable. "You're absolutely right to be skeptical, Victor. I honestly don't know how much of what happened when I was a baby was due to my own magical ability versus my mother's protective magic. That's part of why I wanted to come to Beauxbatons, to develop real magical skills rather than relying on reputation." Victor nodded approvingly. "That is a good attitude. At Durmstrang, we are taught that magical ability must be proven through demonstration, not inherited through circumstance." Gabrielle looked up from the levitation charm she was modifying with obvious success. "Perhaps we should focus on the practical work rather than discussing Harry's past. The best way to judge magical ability is to observe it in action." She gestured toward Harry's workstation, where he had been attempting to apply harmonic resonance theory to improve his levitation charm. "Your approach is theoretically sound, but you are not quite achieving the resonance frequency required for optimal efficiency." Harry accepted her guidance gratefully, adjusting his wand movement and magical focus according to her suggestions. The improvement was immediate and dramatic, with his levitation charm becoming noticeably more stable and requiring less magical energy to maintain. Victor watched this exchange with growing interest. "You learn quickly, Harry, and your magical instincts seem quite well developed, despite your limited formal training." Over the following hour, Harry found himself working productively with his new study group, each member contributing different strengths to their collective magical experimentation. Henry provided enthusiasm and creative problem-solving. Gabrielle offered precise technical knowledge and analytical thinking. Victor brought rigorous methodology and competitive drive, and Harry discovered that he had an intuitive understanding of magical theory that allowed him to bridge the gap between abstract concepts and practical application. Their work on harmonic resonance applications proved successful enough to attract Professor Chen's attention, and by the end of the class period, their group had developed a modified levitation charm that was nearly 30% more efficient than the standard version taught in most magical institutions. "Excellent work," Professor Chen said as he examined their results. "You have successfully applied advanced theoretical concepts to practical magical improvement. I would like you to document your methodology and present your findings to Z next monthly research symposium." As they left the practical magic classroom, Harry felt a sense of accomplishment, unlike anything he had experienced in his previous educational endeavors. The combination of challenging theoretical work and practical application was exactly what he had hoped to find at Beauxbatons. Victor walked alongside them as they made their way to the dining hall for lunch, his earlier competitiveness replaced by what appeared to be genuine respect. "Harry, I must admit that I had doubts about your magical ability based on your fame in the British magical community, but your work in class suggests that you have genuine talent for advanced magical applications. Thank you, Victor. That means a lot coming from someone with your background in rigorous magical education." Gabrielle smiled as they entered the magnificent dining hall with its soaring ceilings and floating candles. "Victor has very high standards for magical competence. The fact that he approves of your work is significant praise." The lunch conversation that followed was unlike any Harry had experienced with peers his own age. Rather than discussing typical adolescent concerns, his new friends engaged in sophisticated analysis of the morning's magical theory lectures, debated the practical applications of different magical techniques, and shared their plans for original research projects they hoped to pursue during the academic year. Henri described his interest in improving magical communication methods, particularly for emergency situations where traditional magical post might not be reliable. Gabrielle spoke enthusiastically about her fascination with protective magic theory and her hope to build on the work Harry's parents had begun. Victor discussed his research into the defensive applications of traditionally dark magical techniques, approaching dangerous magic from an academic rather than malevolent perspective. "What about you, Harry?" Gabrielle asked as they finished their meal. "Have you given thought to what area of magical research you would like to pursue?" Harry considered the question carefully. "I'm definitely interested in protective magic, partly because of my parents' work, but also because I think it's one of the most important applications of magical knowledge. But I'm also fascinated by the international magical cooperation aspects of what we're learning here. The idea that wizards from different countries can work together to solve problems and advance magical knowledge appeals to me." Victor nodded thoughtfully. "That is one of the advantages of studying at an international institution like Beauxbatons. You learn to think beyond the limitations of your own magical culture." As they prepared to leave the dining hall for their afternoon classes, Henri mentioned something that made Harry's heart race with excitement. "By the way, Harry, have you heard about the monthly research symposium that Professor Chen mentioned?" "No. What is it exactly?" Gabrielle's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. "Each month, the Academy hosts a research symposium where students and faculty present their original magical research to visiting scholars from institutions throughout Europe. It is quite prestigious to be invited to present." Victor added his own perspective. "These symposiums often lead to opportunities for advanced study at magical universities or research positions with international magical organizations. They are taken very seriously by the international magical academic community. The prospect of presenting original magical research to international scholars was both thrilling and terrifying. Harry had never imagined that students his age could be involved in such high-level academic work, but everything about Beauxbatons continued to exceed his expectations. Their afternoon classes proved equally challenging and rewarding, with advanced defense against the dark arts, focusing on theoretical understanding of dark magic, rather than simply teaching protective spells, and international magical cooperation, covering the history and practice of collaborative magical research between different magical communities. By the time Harry returned to his dormitory that evening, his mind was buzzing with new concepts, challenging ideas, and exciting possibilities. His conversation with his dormitory roommates, all Bellefeuille students involved in various levels of advanced study, continued the intellectual stimulation as they discussed their respective research interests and academic goals. As he settled down to complete his homework assignments, Harry reflected on how dramatically his expectations for magical education had been transformed. The work was demanding, requiring not just memorization, but genuine understanding and creative application of complex concepts. His classmates were intellectually sophisticated and academically ambitious in ways that pushed him to perform at his highest level. But perhaps most importantly, he was developing friendships based on shared intellectual interests and mutual respect, rather than fame or circumstance. Henri's easy warmth, Gabrielle's brilliant analytical mind, and Victor's rigorous academic standards were creating a peer group that challenged him to grow while providing genuine support and encouragement. The letter he wrote to Professor McGonagall that evening attempted to capture some of his enthusiasm for his new educational environment. "The Academy exceeds every expectation I had when I decided to come here," he wrote. "The level of magical instruction is extraordinary. My fellow students are brilliant and dedicated, and I'm beginning to understand what my parents meant when they valued international magical cooperation so highly." As he sealed the letter and prepared it for Owl Post, Harry felt a deep sense of gratitude for the choices that had brought him to this point. Beauxbatons was proving to be everything he had hoped for, and more, providing not just advanced magical education, but a community of scholars dedicated to expanding the boundaries of magical knowledge and international understanding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight Harry was simply content to be exactly where he belonged, among friends who valued learning and excellence as much as he did, in an institution that honored his parents' legacy while helping him create his own. 3 months into his first year at Beauxbatons Academy, Harry found himself walking through the palace corridors toward Professor Lemaire's office with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation that had become familiar whenever he was called for individual consultations with faculty members. His academic performance had apparently exceeded even the optimistic expectations of the Advanced Studies program, leading to opportunities and responsibilities he had never imagined possible. The corridors of the faculty wing were quieter than the student areas, lined with portraits of distinguished Academy alumni whose achievements in magical research and international cooperation served as inspiration for current students. Harry recognized several of the faces from his reading about magical history, including Nicolas Flamel himself, whose portrait nodded approvingly as Harry passed beneath it. Professor Lemaire's office was located in one of the palace's older towers, reached by a spiral staircase that wound past laboratories and research rooms, where advanced students worked on independent projects under faculty supervision. Through open doorways, Harry caught glimpses of magical experimentation that reinforced his growing understanding of Beauxbatons as a genuine center of magical innovation rather than simply an educational institution. He knocked on the professor's door and was invited to enter by her familiar, crisp voice. The office beyond was everything he had expected from someone of her academic stature, lined floor to ceiling with books in multiple languages, magical instruments whose purposes he could only guess at, and documents that appeared to be original research papers covered with complex magical equations. Professor Lemaire looked up from a paper she had been grading, her steel-grey eyes brightening with what Harry had learned to recognize as her version of enthusiasm. "Ah, Harry, punctual as always. Please, sit down. I have something quite exciting to discuss with you." Harry settled into the comfortable chair across from her desk, noting the stack of what appeared to be advanced magical texts positioned within easy reach. His curiosity was immediately piqued by the professor's obvious excitement about whatever opportunity she was about to present. "Harry," Professor Lemaire began, setting aside her grading with decisive finality, "your work in advanced magical theory has been exceptional, particularly your intuitive grasp of protective magic principles and your innovative approaches to theoretical problem-solving. The faculty has been discussing your progress, and we believe you are ready for accelerated advancement." Harry felt his heart rate increase. Accelerated advancement sounded both thrilling and potentially overwhelming. "What exactly does that mean, Professor?" "It means," she replied with a slight smile, "that we would like to advance you directly into fifth-year transfiguration and ancient runes, bypassing the intermediate levels entirely. Your theoretical understanding has developed rapidly enough that the standard progression would actually hold you back from reaching your full potential." The implications of this offer were staggering. Harry had been at Beauxbatons for only 3 months, yet the faculty was suggesting he skip 4 years of prerequisite coursework in 2 critical magical subjects. The opportunity was everything he had hoped for when he chose international magical education, but it also represented challenges that felt almost overwhelming. "Professor," he said carefully, "I'm honored by your confidence in me, but I have to ask whether I'm actually prepared for such advanced work. 3 months ago, I didn't even know I was magical." Professor Lemaire leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. "Harry, traditional magical education progression is based on age and time spent in study, rather than actual magical development and understanding. You have demonstrated mastery of theoretical concepts that most students do not grasp until their 4th or 5th year. More importantly, you have shown the kind of creative thinking and analytical ability that advanced magical study requires." She gestured toward a collection of papers on her desk. "Your work on harmonic resonance applications has been so innovative that Professor Chen has submitted it for publication in the Journal of Applied Magical Theory. That is extraordinarily rare for a first-year student at any magical institution." Harry stared at her, trying to process what she was telling him. His classroom projects were being considered for publication in an academic journal. The recognition was both thrilling and somewhat terrifying, representing a level of academic achievement he had never dared to imagine. "But that is not all," Professor Lemaire continued. "We would also like to offer you the opportunity to begin independent research under faculty supervision. Specifically, we believe you are ready to explore advanced applications of your parents' work in protective magic theory." The mention of his parents' research made Harry's chest tighten with a mixture of excitement and emotional weight. This was exactly what he had hoped to find at Beauxbatons, the opportunity to understand and build upon their academic legacy. But it also felt like an enormous responsibility. "What kind of research are you proposing, Professor?" Professor Lemaire stood and moved to one of her bookshelves, returning with a leather-bound volume that appeared to be significantly older than most of the other texts in her office. "The Academy has been working to expand your parents' theoretical framework for familial protective magic. We believe Zaire techniques could be adapted to create protective networks that extend beyond blood relationships to include chosen family bonds." Harry's breath caught as he considered the implications. Protective magic that could guard not just blood relatives, but chosen families, friends who had become as close as siblings, magical communities bound together by shared purpose rather than genetics. The potential applications were extraordinary. Their research would involve both theoretical development and practical experimentation, Professor Lemaire explained, as she placed the volume on the desk between them. "You would work with me and Professor Dubois to design new protective techniques, test their effectiveness, and document your findings for potential publication." The opportunity was everything Harry had dreamed of when he decided to pursue his magical education at Beauxbatons. Advanced coursework that would challenge him intellectually, original research that could contribute meaningfully to magical knowledge, and the chance to honor his parents' memory by building upon their innovative work. Professor, he said finally, I'm very interested in these opportunities, but I have to ask about the practical implications. If I advance to fifth-year coursework in some subjects while remaining at first-year level in others, how would that affect my overall academic progression? Professor Lemaire smiled approvingly. An excellent question, and one that demonstrates the kind of strategic thinking that advanced study requires. The Academy has considerable experience with individualized academic progression. You would continue with your current first-year coursework in subjects where you are developing normally, while advancing in areas where your ability warrants acceleration. She opened the leather-bound volume to reveal pages covered with complex magical diagrams and theoretical equations. More importantly, the independent research would count toward advanced degree credit. If you continue to progress at your current rate, you could complete your basic magical education in 5 years rather than 7. With significant research experience, Zate would prepare you for advanced study at magical universities. The prospect of completing his magical education in 5 years while gaining genuine research experience was almost too good to believe. Harry felt as though Professor Lemaire was offering him exactly the kind of accelerated, intensive magical education he had been seeking. I would like to accept these opportunities, Professor. Both the accelerated coursework and the research project sound exactly like what I was hoping to find at Beauxbatons. Excellent, Professor Lemaire replied, her satisfaction evident in both her expression and her voice. We will arrange for you to begin the advanced coursework next week. The research project will require some additional preparation, but we should be able to begin that within the month. As Harry prepared to leave her office, Professor Lemaire handed him several advanced textbooks that would serve as preparation for his accelerated coursework. One final thing. Harry, the faculty has also discussed the possibility of you representing Beauxbatons at the International Young Magical Researchers Conference in Prague this spring. Your work would certainly qualify, and the experience would be invaluable for your future academic development. Harry accepted the textbooks with hands that were slightly unsteady from excitement and nervousness. An international conference where he would present his research to young magical scholars from around the world. The opportunity represented everything he had hoped to achieve through his magical education. Thank you, Professor. I'm honored by your confidence in me, and excited about all of these opportunities. As Harry made his way back through the palace corridors toward his dormitory, his mind was spinning with the implications of Professor Lemaire's offers. The accelerated coursework would be challenging but manageable, given his theoretical foundation. The research project represented a chance to contribute meaningfully to magical knowledge while honoring his parents' legacy. The international conference would provide exposure to magical research from around the world. But perhaps most importantly, these opportunities validated his decision to choose Beauxbatons over Hogwarts. He could not imagine any British magical institution offering a first-year student such advanced academic options or research opportunities. Henry was waiting in their common room when Harry returned to Bellefeuille House, his expression bright with curiosity about the faculty meeting. From your expression, mon ami, I assume Professor Lemaire had good news to share. Harry set down his new textbooks with careful attention to their obvious age and value. She offered me accelerated advancement to 5th-year transfiguration and ancient runes, plus an independent research project on protective magic theory. Henry's eyebrows rose with genuine amazement. Mon Dieu. But that is extraordinary. Harry, I've never heard of a first-year student being offered such opportunities. The faculty must be very impressed with your progress. Gabrielle appeared from the study area where she had been working on her own advanced assignments, her expression immediately focusing on the conversation with characteristic intensity. What kind of research project? Harry, is it related to your parents' work? Yes, exactly. Harry explained Professor Lemaire's proposal for expanding familial protective magic theory to include chosen family bonds, watching as Gabrielle's excitement grew with each detail. "That could revolutionize protective magic applications," she said when he finished. "The implications for magical community safety would be enormous." "Harry, this is the kind of research that establishes academic reputations." Victor joined them as Harry was describing the potential international conference opportunity, his expression shifting from initial skepticism to obvious respect as he absorbed the scope of what was being offered. "Harry," Victor said finally, "I must admit that, when I first met you, I wondered whether your academic opportunities here were based more on your fame than on your ability. But Zeus offers from the faculty prove that your magical talent and theoretical understanding are genuine." Harry appreciated Victor's honesty, even though the admission was somewhat uncomfortable. "I'm grateful for all of these opportunities, but I also know I'll need to work harder than ever to prove I deserve them." Their conversation continued as other Bellefeuille students gathered in the common room, drawn by news of Harry's accelerated advancement and research opportunities. The response was universally supportive, with older students offering advice about managing advanced coursework and sharing their own experiences with independent research projects. Felipe, the fourth-year student who had helped orient Harry during his first week, provided particularly valuable guidance. "The key to succeeding with accelerated coursework is to focus on understanding rather than memorization, Harry. The advanced classes assume you can think creatively about magical applications rather than simply following established procedures." Marie, who was in her final year and had considerable research experience, offered insights about the challenges and rewards of independent magical research. "The most difficult part is learning to think like a researcher rather than a student," she explained. "You must be willing to question established magical theory and propose new approaches, even if they seem impossible at first." As the evening progressed, Harry found himself surrounded by friends and housemates who were genuinely excited about his academic opportunities and eager to help him succeed. The sense of community and mutual support was unlike anything he had experienced in his previous educational environments. Later that night, alone in his dormitory room with its spectacular view of the Pyrenees Mountains, Harry opened the first of his new advanced textbooks and began reading about theoretical approaches to transfiguration that built upon concepts he had only recently mastered. The material was challenging but accessible, building logically upon the foundation he had developed through his intensive first-semester coursework. The letter he wrote to Professor McGonagall that evening attempted to capture his excitement about the new opportunities while acknowledging the challenges they represented. "The faculty here continues to exceed my expectations for what magical education can offer," he wrote. "I'm being challenged academically in ways I never imagined possible, while receiving support and guidance that helps me rise to meet those challenges." He also wrote to Hermione and Ron, his would-be Hogwarts friends, whose correspondence had continued throughout his first semester at Beauxbatons. Their latest letters had described their own academic experiences, which sounded increasingly limited compared to what Harry was discovering at the academy. As he sealed his letters and prepared them for owl post, Harry reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that morning, when he discovered the hidden Beauxbatons invitation in his Hogwarts letter. The decision to choose international magical education had opened doors he had never imagined existed, providing opportunities for academic advancement and original research that would shape his entire future as a wizard. The advanced textbooks on his desk represented challenges that would test his magical understanding and theoretical knowledge. The research project would require creativity and innovation as he worked to expand upon his parents' groundbreaking work. The international conference would expose him to magical scholarship from around the world, but perhaps most importantly, he was developing into the kind of wizard he had always hoped to become. Someone who contributed meaningfully to magical knowledge, who honored his parents' legacy through his own achievements, and who approached magic with the curiosity and dedication it deserved. As Harry drifted off to sleep in his comfortable dormitory room, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the choices that had brought him to this point. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as he began his accelerated coursework and started preparing for his research project. But tonight he was simply content to be exactly where he belonged, among friends who supported his ambitions and faculty, who challenged him to reach his full potential. The future stretched ahead of him, full of possibilities he had never dared to imagine when he was living in the cupboard under the stairs at Privet Drive. And that future was entirely his own creation, built through choices made with careful thought and determination to become the best wizard he could possibly be. The snow that began falling on December 20th transformed the Palace of Beauxbatons into something even more magical than Harry had thought possible, dusting the elegant spires and covered bridges with pristine white that caught the light like scattered diamonds. As Christmas approached, most students prepared to return home for the holidays, but Harry had chosen to remain at the academy to take advantage of the special holiday research program that Madame Maxime had established for students pursuing advanced independent study. The decision to stay had been an easy one. The Dursleys had shown no interest in his return, Uncle Vernon making his feelings clear in a tersely worded letter that essentially forbade Harry from bringing any magical materials into the house. More importantly, Professor Lemaire had arranged for Harry to have access to the Academy's restricted magical archives during the holiday break, an opportunity that was too valuable to pass up. On Christmas Eve morning, Harry made his way through corridors that were quieter than usual, but no less magnificent, decorated with ice sculptures that never melted, and garlands of evergreen that seemed to shimmer with their own inner light. The restricted archives were located in the oldest section of the palace, reached through a series of password-protected doors that opened to reveal chambers lined with magical texts and research materials dating back centuries. Madame Maxime herself was waiting for him in the main archive chamber, her impressive height made even more striking by the soaring ceilings and ancient stonework that surrounded them. She stood beside a table, laden with books and documents that had clearly been selected with considerable care and attention. "Bon matin, Harry," she said, with a warm smile that transformed her usually formal demeanor. "I hope you are prepared for what may be a rather revelatory morning. The materials I have gathered for your review include some quite remarkable discoveries about your parents' work." Harry approached the table with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. The books and papers spread before him appeared to represent a comprehensive collection of research materials related to protective magic theory, including several volumes that bore the distinctive binding and protective charms of the Academy's most restricted collections. "What exactly have you found, Madame Maxime?" The headmistress gestured toward a leather-bound journal that occupied the center of the table. "This is your parents' personal research journal, from their time here at Beauxbatons. It contains not only their published work on familial protective magic, but also their preliminary notes on techniques that were never formally documented." Harry's breath caught as he realized what he was looking at, his parents' actual research notes, in their own handwriting, containing ideas and discoveries that had never been shared with the broader magical community. The opportunity to read their thoughts and understand their reasoning in their own words was both thrilling and deeply emotional. "But that is not all," Madame Maxime continued, moving to indicate another collection of documents. "We have also discovered correspondence between your parents and several international magical researchers, including the Flamels, that suggests their work had implications far beyond what was ever published." She opened one of the letters to reveal elegant handwriting in what appeared to be Nicolas Flamel's distinctive script. "The Flamels believed that your parents' techniques could be applied not just to protective magic, but to magical preservation more generally. There are suggestions here of applications that could extend magical longevity, preserve magical knowledge, even maintain magical locations against decay or destruction." Harry stared at the letters, trying to process the implications of what Madame Maxime was revealing. His parents had been working on magical techniques that went far beyond simple protection, developing theories that could have revolutionized multiple areas of magical practice. Why was none of this ever published or developed further? He asked, his voice quieter than he had intended. Madame Maxime's expression grew more serious, taking on the kind of gravity that suggested she was about to reveal something significant and potentially troubling. Because, mon cher Harry, Zaire research was suppressed by the British Ministry of Magic after their deaths. The official reason given was that the techniques were too dangerous for general knowledge, but the real reason appears to have been political. Harry felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December weather. Political how? The headmistress moved to another section of the table, indicating a collection of official-looking documents bearing the seal of the British Ministry of Magic. These are copies of the correspondence between the Ministry and various international magical institutions regarding your parents' research. The Ministry argued that Zaire techniques could be used for dark purposes if they fell into the wrong hands. Harry examined the documents, his anger growing as he read official justifications for suppressing research that could have benefited the entire magical community. But surely other magical institutions disagreed with this decision. Indeed, they did. Madame Maxime's voice carried a note of indignation that Harry had never heard from her before. The International Confederation of Wizards voted to preserve and continue the research, but the British Ministry refused to cooperate. More troubling, they used their political influence to discourage other countries from pursuing the work independently. The revelation that his parents' groundbreaking research had been deliberately suppressed for political reasons rather than genuine safety concerns made Harry feel sick with anger and frustration. How much magical knowledge had been lost because of bureaucratic interference and political maneuvering? "Harry," Madame Maxime said gently, "I am sharing this information with you not to upset you, but because I believe you have the right to know the full scope of your parents' achievements. More importantly, I believe you may be the key to recovering and advancing their lost work." She gestured toward the research journal and supporting documents. The Academy has been working quietly for years to reconstruct and continue their research, building on the fragments that survived the suppression. With your help and your intuitive understanding of their magical techniques, we believe we can not only recover their lost discoveries, but advance them far beyond what they originally achieved. Harry looked down at his parents' journal, feeling the weight of responsibility and opportunity in equal measure. The chance to restore his parents' suppressed research and contribute to magical knowledge that could benefit wizards around the world was everything he had hoped for when he chose to study at Beauxbatons. "Madame Maxime, I would be honored to help with this work, not just because it's my parents' research, but because it sounds like it could make a real difference in the magical world." The headmistress smiled with obvious satisfaction and approval. "Excellent. Professor Lemaire and I have designed a special research program that will allow you to work with these materials throughout the remainder of your time at the Academy. The work will be challenging and at times frustrating, but the potential discoveries make it worthwhile." She moved to unlock another cabinet, revealing additional research materials that appeared even older and more carefully preserved than the collection already on the table. "We also have access to the original research that inspired your parents' work, including medieval texts on sacrificial magic and ancient theories of magical resonance that have never been translated into modern magical languages." The scope of the research project that Madame Maxime was offering was far beyond anything Harry had imagined when Professor Lemaire first mentioned the possibility of independent study. This was genuine magical archaeology, the recovery and advancement of lost magical knowledge that could reshape understanding of protective magic and its applications. As Harry began examining his parents' research journal, he found himself immediately absorbed in their careful documentation of experimental procedures, theoretical frameworks, and innovative approaches to magical problems. Their handwriting was clear and methodical, accompanied by detailed diagrams and equations that demonstrated the sophisticated mathematical foundation underlying their magical innovations. But it was their personal notes and observations that truly captured his attention, revealing not just their intellectual processes, but their personalities and motivations. Lily's contributions focused on the emotional and relationship aspects of protective magic, exploring how bonds of love and loyalty could be transformed into tangible magical protection. James's work emphasized the practical applications and defensive strategies that could emerge from theoretical advances. Together, their research represented a comprehensive approach to protective magic that integrated emotional resonance, mathematical precision, and practical application in ways that were genuinely revolutionary. Harry could see why the international magical community had been so excited about their discoveries, and why the British Ministry's suppression of their work represented such a significant loss to magical knowledge. Madame Maxime allowed him to work undisturbed for several hours, providing guidance only when he encountered concepts or terminology that required additional explanation. By mid-afternoon, Harry had developed a basic understanding of his parents' theoretical framework and was beginning to see possibilities for extending their work that they had never had the opportunity to explore. The Delacour family has invited you to spend Christmas Day at their estate, Madame Maxime mentioned, as Harry finally looked up from the research materials. Gabrielle is quite excited about the opportunity to discuss your parents' work with someone who has such an intuitive understanding of their techniques. Harry felt a rush of gratitude and excitement at the prospect of spending Christmas with people who valued learning and intellectual discussion as much as he did. The contrast with his previous Christmas experiences at Privet Drive could not have been more stark. That sounds wonderful, Madame Maxime. I'm looking forward to meeting Gabrielle's family and learning more about French magical traditions. The headmistress nodded approvingly. The Delacours have a long tradition of supporting magical research and international cooperation. Monsieur Delacour serves on the board of the International Magical Research Foundation, and Madame Delacour has published several papers on advanced magical theory. You will find them very stimulating conversation partners. As Harry prepared to leave the archives for the day, Madame Maxime handed him a small collection of books and documents that he could take with him for continued study. Remember, Harry, the work you are undertaking has the potential to honor your parents' memory, while advancing magical knowledge in ways that could benefit wizards for generations to come. The responsibility is significant, but so are the rewards. That evening, Harry sat in his dormitory room, reading through his parents' research notes by the light of floating candles that cast warm shadows across the pages. The palace was quieter than usual, with so many students gone for the holidays, but the silence was peaceful rather than lonely, providing an ideal environment for concentrated study. The letters he wrote that night attempted to capture some of his excitement about the research discoveries, while maintaining appropriate discretion about the sensitive nature of the suppressed materials. To Professor McGonagall, he wrote about his gratitude for the research opportunities and his growing understanding of his parents' academic achievements. To Hermione and Ron, he described the intellectual stimulation of working with original magical research and the sense of connection he felt to his parents through their scholarly work. Christmas morning dawned clear and bright, with sunlight reflecting off the snow-covered mountains in a display that was almost too beautiful to believe. Harry made his way to the Academy's Flu Network connection, where a cheerful house elf provided him with the flu powder necessary to travel to the Delacour estate. The flu journey was smooth and efficient, depositing him in an elegant sitting room that managed to be both grand and welcoming. The Delacour estate was clearly the home of a family that valued both magical tradition and intellectual sophistication, with books and magical instruments arranged throughout the space in ways that suggested they were regularly used rather than simply decorative. Gabrielle appeared almost immediately, her face bright with excitement and welcome. "Harry, we are so pleased that you could join us for Christmas," Papa and Maman are very much looking forward to meeting you and discussing your research work." She led him through the estate to a magnificent dining room where the rest of the Delacour family was gathered around a table laden with foods that represented the finest of French magical cuisine. Fleur was there with her characteristic elegance and warmth, along with her parents, who immediately struck Harry as people who combined sophistication with genuine intellectual curiosity. Monsieur Delacour was a distinguished man with the kind of quiet authority that suggested both academic achievement and practical wisdom. His greeting was warm but assessing, clearly evaluating Harry with the experienced eye of someone accustomed to working with young magical researchers. Madame Delacour possessed the same ethereal beauty as her daughters, but radiated an additional quality of sharp intelligence and scholarly focus that immediately put Harry at ease. Her questions about his research work were thoughtful and insightful, demonstrating a genuine understanding of the theoretical concepts he was exploring. The Christmas dinner conversation ranged across topics that included international magical cooperation, theoretical advances in protective magic, and the political challenges facing the magical research community. Harry found himself contributing meaningfully to discussions that challenged his understanding, while expanding his knowledge in directions he had never considered. Monsieur Delacour proved particularly knowledgeable about the political circumstances that had led to the suppression of Harry's parents' research. The British ministry's actions were quite controversial at the time, he explained over the magnificent Christmas pudding. Many of us in the international magical community believed that they were motivated more by fear of losing magical influence than by genuine safety concerns. Madame Delacour added her own perspective on the broader implications. Your parents' work represented a fundamental shift toward international magical cooperation and shared knowledge. Some institutions found this threatening to their traditional authority structures. As the afternoon progressed, Harry found himself engaged in conversations that not only enhanced his understanding of his research project, but provided insights into the political and cultural context that shaped international magical relationships. The Delacour family's perspective on magical cooperation and knowledge sharing aligned perfectly with his own growing understanding of what magical education and research should strive to achieve. Gabrielle spent considerable time discussing the technical aspects of protective magic theory, her analytical mind grasping the implications of Harry's parents' work with impressive speed and creativity. Together, they explored possibilities for extending the research that neither had considered independently, developing ideas that could form the basis for future collaborative work. As evening approached and Harry prepared to return to the academy, Madame Delacour presented him with a beautifully wrapped package. "A small contribution to your research," she said, with a smile that suggested the contents were more significant than her modest words implied. Inside was a collection of rare magical texts on protective theory, including several volumes that appeared to be medieval manuscripts translated into modern French. The books represented resources that would be invaluable for his research project and impossible to obtain through normal academic channels. The Delacour family has always believed in supporting promising young researchers, Monsieur Delacour explained, as Harry expressed his gratitude. Your work on your parents' research represents exactly the kind of international magical cooperation that the community needs. As Harry returned to his dormitory room that night, he reflected on a Christmas day that had been unlike any he had ever experienced. Instead of loneliness and neglect, he had found intellectual stimulation and genuine acceptance. Instead of feeling disconnected from his parents' memory, he had gained deeper understanding of their achievements and clearer direction for honoring their legacy through his own work. The research materials spread across his desk represented both tremendous opportunity and significant responsibility. The chance to recover and advance his parents' suppressed magical research was exactly what he had hoped to find when he chose international magical education. But more than that, it offered the possibility of making genuine contributions to magical knowledge that could benefit wizards for generations to come. As Harry settled down to continue his reading of his parents' research notes, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the choices that had brought him to this point. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as he delved deeper into complex magical theory and began developing his own experimental approaches. But tonight he was simply content to be exactly where he belonged, pursuing the kind of meaningful magical research that honored his parents while creating his own academic legacy. The spring term at Beauxbatons brought with it an unexpected opportunity that would reshape Harry's understanding of magical competition and international cooperation. As the snow melted from the Pyrenees peaks and the palace gardens began to bloom with flowers that seemed to glow with their own inner light, Madame Maxime called a special assembly to announce something that had not occurred in over a century. The great hall was filled with an anticipatory energy as students from all 4 houses gathered beneath the soaring ceilings and floating chandeliers. Harry sat between Henri and Gabrielle at the Bellefeuille table, all 3 of them speculating about what could possibly warrant such a formal announcement in the middle of the academic year. Mes chers étudiants, Madame Maxime began, her impressive height and regal bearing commanding immediate attention from every corner of the hall. Today I have the extraordinary pleasure of announcing the revival of the Tri-Wizard Tournament, a magical competition between the 3 most prestigious European magical institutions. The hall erupted in excited whispers and exclamations as students processed this unexpected news. Harry had read about the Tri-Wizard Tournament in his studies of magical history, but the competition had been discontinued decades ago due to safety concerns and political tensions between magical schools. The tournament will be hosted by Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Zeus, coming October, Madame Maxime continued, her voice carrying easily over the student chatter. Representatives from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang Institute will compete in 3 dangerous magical challenges designed to test courage, intelligence, and magical ability. Harry felt his heart rate increase as he realized the implications of what Madame Maxime was announcing. This tournament would bring him back into contact with Hogwarts and potentially with Professor Dumbledore, creating exactly the kind of situation he had hoped to avoid by choosing international magical education. Gabrielle leaned closer to whisper her own thoughts. This is quite remarkable. Harry, the tournament has not been held since before our parents were students. To be selected as Beauxbatons champion would be an extraordinary honor. Henri nodded enthusiastically from Harry's other side. The champions are typically chosen from the most advanced students, those who have demonstrated exceptional magical ability and academic achievement. Given your progress in the Advanced Studies program, you might actually be considered for selection. The possibility of representing Beauxbatons in magical competition was both thrilling and terrifying. Harry had thrived in the collaborative academic environment of the academy, but magical competition would be an entirely different challenge, requiring not just theoretical knowledge, but practical magical skills applied under pressure. The selection process will be quite rigorous, Madame Maxime continued, as if reading Harry's thoughts. Each school will choose their champion through a combination of magical testing and faculty evaluation. The tournament itself will require not only magical ability, but also courage, quick thinking, and the ability to perform under extraordinary pressure. She gestured toward the head table where several faculty members sat, watching the student response with obvious interest. The faculty will begin evaluating potential candidates immediately. Students who are interested in consideration for the championship should submit their applications along with documentation of their magical achievements and academic progress. As the assembly concluded and students began filing out of the great hall with animated discussions about the tournament, Harry found himself torn between excitement and apprehension. The opportunity to represent Beauxbatons in international magical competition appealed to his competitive nature and his desire to honor the academy that had given him such extraordinary educational opportunities. But returning to Hogwarts, even as a visiting champion, would mean confronting Professor Dumbledore and potentially defending his decision to pursue his magical education in France rather than Britain. The political implications alone were enough to give him pause, quite apart from the dangerous magical challenges the tournament would presumably entail. Victor appeared at their table as they gathered their books and prepared to leave for their next classes. "Harry," he said with characteristic directness, "you must apply for consideration as Beauxbatons champion. Your magical development over the past year has been extraordinary, and your research work demonstrates exactly the kind of innovative thinking that tournament challenges require." Gabrielle nodded agreement. "Moreover, your presence at the tournament would send an important message about international magical cooperation and the value of choosing one's own educational path. The British magical community should see what you have accomplished at Beauxbatons." Henri added his own perspective with typical enthusiasm. "Think of the opportunity to demonstrate the superiority of Beauxbatons magical education, mon ami. You could show them what they lost when they allowed you to choose your own school." Their encouragement was gratifying, but Harry remained uncertain about whether competing in the tournament aligned with his academic goals and personal values. The prospect of magical competition held definite appeal, but he had come to Beauxbatons to pursue scholarly research and advanced magical learning, not to engage in dangerous contests for international prestige. That evening, Harry sought guidance from Professor Lemaire, whose office had become a familiar refuge when he needed advice about academic decisions or research directions. She listened thoughtfully as he described his conflicted feelings about the tournament opportunity. "Your concerns are quite reasonable, Harry," she said after he finished explaining his reservations. "The tournament would certainly present challenges beyond the magical tasks themselves. However, I believe you should consider the broader implications of your potential participation." She moved to her window, gazing out at the mountain peaks visible in the distance. "The tournament represents an opportunity to demonstrate the value of international magical cooperation and the importance of allowing students to choose their own educational paths. Your success as a Beauxbatons champion would validate the decisions you have made about your magical education." Professor Lemaire turned back toward him with an expression that combined warmth with academic seriousness. "More importantly, the tournament challenges are designed to test exactly the kind of creative problem-solving and advanced magical application that you have been developing through your research work. The skills you have gained here would serve you well in magical competition." The professor's perspective helped clarify Harry's thinking about the potential benefits of tournament participation. Representing Beauxbatons would indeed provide an opportunity to demonstrate what he had learned through international magical education, while the competitive challenges could serve as a practical test of his magical development. "Professor," he said finally, "if I were to apply for consideration, what would the selection process involve?" "The faculty evaluation would examine your magical abilities, academic achievements, problem-solving skills, and ability to perform under pressure." Professor Lemaire consulted a document on her desk. "Given your progress in ZE Advanced Studies program and your research work, I believe you would be a strong candidate for selection." She looked up from the document with obvious pride. "Harry, you have exceeded every expectation we had when you arrived at the Academy. Your magical development, academic achievements, and research contributions have been truly remarkable. The tournament would provide an opportunity to share those achievements with the broader magical community." Over the following week, Harry found himself increasingly drawn to the idea of tournament participation as he discussed the opportunity with friends, faculty, and even his research collaborators. The consensus was unanimous that he should apply for consideration, with various supporters offering different but compelling reasons for his participation. Madame Maxime herself expressed strong support when Harry finally approached her about submitting an application. "Your achievements at Beauxbatons have been extraordinary, mon cher Harry," she said with obvious satisfaction. The tournament would provide the perfect opportunity to demonstrate the value of the educational choices you have made. She gestured toward the impressive collection of academic documents that represented Harry's first-year achievements. Your research work, accelerated coursework, and collaborative projects represent exactly the kind of magical excellence that the tournament is designed to celebrate. More importantly, your participation would honor the Academy's commitment to international magical cooperation. The application process proved to be as rigorous as Professor Lemaire had suggested, requiring detailed documentation of magical abilities, academic achievements, and research contributions. Harry spent several days compiling materials that represented the full scope of his magical development at Beauxbatons, from his placement examination results to his most recent research findings. But it was the practical magical testing that truly challenged him in ways he had not anticipated. The Faculty Evaluation Committee, led by Professor Dubois and including representatives from each house, designed challenges that tested not just magical power, but creativity, adaptability, and performance under pressure. The first challenge required Harry to demonstrate advanced transfiguration techniques under time constraints, transforming a series of objects into increasingly complex configurations while maintaining precision and efficiency. His accelerated coursework proved invaluable as he worked through problems that would typically challenge students several years older. The second challenge involved defensive magic applications, requiring him to protect a series of targets from magical attacks while simultaneously maintaining offensive capabilities. His research into protective magic theory provided innovative approaches that impressed even the experienced faculty evaluators. The final challenge was the most demanding, requiring Harry to solve a complex magical problem that integrated multiple areas of study under simulated emergency conditions. The scenario involved protecting a group of civilians from a magical disaster while coordinating with other wizards and adapting to changing circumstances. Harry found himself drawing on everything he had learned at Beauxbatons as he worked through the challenge, integrating theoretical knowledge with practical application while demonstrating the kind of creative problem-solving that had characterized his academic success. The sense of accomplishment he felt upon completion was unlike anything from his previous magical experiences. Victor, who had also applied for consideration as a potential champion, sought Harry out after the practical testing concluded. "Harry," he said with characteristic honesty, "I've competed in magical tournaments at Durmstrang, but I've never seen anyone approach magical challenges with the creativity and innovation you demonstrated today. If the faculty selects you as champion, Beauxbatons will be very well represented." The selection results were announced at dinner 3 days later, with Madame Maxime rising to address the assembled students with obvious pride and satisfaction. After careful evaluation of all applications and thorough testing of magical abilities, she announced, "The faculty has selected our champion for the Triwizard Tournament." The hall fell silent as students awaited the announcement, tension building as Madame Maxime paused for dramatic effect. Harry felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he realized that whatever happened next would significantly impact his immediate future and potentially his entire magical career. "It is my great pleasure to announce that Harry Potter will represent Beauxbatons Academy of Magic in the upcoming Triwizard Tournament." The explosion of cheers and applause that greeted this announcement was overwhelming, with students from all 4 houses celebrating Harry's selection with genuine enthusiasm and pride. Henri and Gabrielle flanked him immediately, their excitement infectious as they congratulated him on achieving this extraordinary honor. Victor approached with a broad smile and extended hand. "Congratulations, Harry. You have earned this opportunity through your magical achievements and academic excellence. I am proud to have competed against you and honored to call you a friend." As the celebration continued around him, Harry felt a complex mixture of emotions. The selection as Beauxbatons champion was undeniably an incredible honor, validating the choices he had made about his magical education and recognizing the progress he had achieved through dedicated study and research. But it also meant returning to Hogwarts and facing the magical community that he had chosen to leave behind. The tournament would test not just his magical abilities, but his confidence in the decisions that had shaped his magical development. Most importantly, it would provide an opportunity to demonstrate what international magical education could achieve when students were encouraged to pursue excellence rather than simply following traditional paths. That evening, alone in his dormitory room with its familiar view of the mountain peaks, Harry wrote letters to inform his various correspondents about his selection as tournament champion. To Professor McGonagall, he expressed both excitement about the opportunity and gratitude for her support of his educational choices. To Hermione and Ron, he described the selection process and his hopes for representing Beauxbatons with distinction. But it was his letter to the Dursleys that proved most satisfying to write, informing them with carefully controlled politeness that he would not be returning to Privet Drive for the summer as planned, instead remaining in France to prepare for international magical competition. Their response, when it came, was predictably dismissive and relieved in equal measure. The months of preparation that followed transformed Harry's understanding of what magical competition could involve. Rather than simply drilling individual spells or techniques, the Academy's approach to tournament training integrated advanced magical theory with practical application, emphasizing adaptability and creative problem-solving over brute magical force. Professor Dubois took personal responsibility for Harry's defensive magic preparation, working with him to develop techniques that built upon his research into protective magic while preparing him for offensive magical challenges. Professor Lemaire designed training scenarios that required rapid application of transfiguration theory under pressure. Professor Chen created practical exercises that tested Harry's ability to coordinate complex magical applications while managing multiple simultaneous challenges. But perhaps most valuable was the collaborative preparation approach that characterized Beauxbatons' tournament training philosophy. Rather than isolating Harry from his peers to focus exclusively on competitive preparation, the faculty encouraged continued participation in research projects and academic coursework while integrating tournament training with his broader magical education. Henri, Gabriel, and Victor became unofficial training partners, helping Harry develop techniques and strategies while providing the kind of intellectual challenge and emotional support that made the intensive preparation manageable and even enjoyable. As autumn approached and the tournament date drew near, Harry felt as prepared as possible for whatever challenges awaited him at Hogwarts. More importantly, he felt confident that his selection as Beauxbatons champion represented not just personal achievement, but validation of the educational philosophy and international cooperation that the Academy embodied. The tournament would test his magical abilities, but it would also provide an opportunity to demonstrate what he had become through his choices about magical education. Whatever the outcome, Harry was determined to represent Beauxbatons and international magical cooperation with distinction and pride.